Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that'll haunt you more than your middle school yearbook photo. Medieval rules that somehow, against all logic and reason, we're still following today. Not the good ones, mind you. Not don't murder people or maybe wash your hands. I'm talking about the absolutely bonkers traditions, etiquette rules, and social customs that medieval peasants and nobles cooked up between bouts of dysentery and made us all think were totally normal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Probably all wondering why we still shake hands like we're checking each other for concealed daggers. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's pause and think about this. Why do we still wear uncomfortable formal clothes that were designed for people who never moved faster than a leisurely horse trot? Why is it rude to put your elbows on the table when medieval nobility literally threw bones on the floor and wiped their hands on their clothes? Why do we say bless you when someone sneezes like we're still worried their soul might escape? Why do wedding rings go on a specific finger because some ancient physician made up nonsense about a vein to the heart? And honestly, have you ever stopped to wonder why we knock on wood? Throw salt over our shoulders, or think Friday the 13th is unlucky when none of these things have any basis in reality whatsoever. And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the 21st century, but you're about to discover that you're basically living in medieval Europe with better plumbing. Welcome to the realization that we're all just medieval peasants with smartphones, still following rules that made zero sense 800 years ago, and make even less sense now. Let's start with something you probably did today without thinking twice about it. The handshake. You meet someone, you extend your right hand, you grip, you pump once or twice, and boom! Social contract established. Feels natural, right? Except it's not natural at all. It's medieval paranoia disguised as politeness. Back in the Middle Ages, everyone was armed. Everyone was suspicious, and trust was about as common as a hot bath. The handshake originated as a way to prove you weren't holding a weapon. Knights, nobles, merchants, even peasants with delusions of grandeur walked around with daggers tucked into their belts. When you met someone new, especially someone you didn't trust, which was everyone, you needed a way to show you weren't about to stab them in the ribs. So you extended your weapon hand, your right hand, empty and open. The other person did the same. You grabbed each other's hands and shook, partly to dislodge any hidden blades up the sleeve, partly to physically prevent the other person from drawing a weapon. It was a mutual disarmament protocol, not a greeting. You were essentially saying, look, my hand is empty, your hand is empty. Let's talk for 30 seconds without anyone bleeding out. Romantic, right? And the shaking motion itself, that vigorous up and down pump, wasn't just for show. People genuinely believed you could shake loose a knife hidden up someone's sleeve, so you'd grip tight and jiggle their whole arm like you were trying to get ketchup out of a bottle. If a blade clattered to the ground, you knew diplomacy was off the table. If nothing fell out great, you could proceed to lie to each other about grain prices. Now let's fast forward a few centuries. We're not walking around armed anymore. Well, most of us aren't. We're not worried about concealed daggers or surprise stabbings during business meetings. And yet we still shake hands. At job interviews, at weddings, at funerals, when meeting our partner's parents for the first time. We extend our right hands like we're participating in some ancient ritual we don't fully understand, which, to be fair, we are. And here's the kicker. We judge people based on their handshake. A weak handshake, and you're labelled untrustworthy, timid or worse, European. Too strong, and you're overcompensating, aggressive, trying too hard. The handshake has to be firm but not crushing, confident but not domineering, lasting exactly 2 to 3 seconds and accompanied by the right amount of eye contact. It's a social minefield based on a custom designed to prevent actual minefields of sharp objects. We've turned medieval weapon checks into a personality test. And it gets weirder. Different cultures shake hands differently, and if you get it wrong, you've committed a faux pas that people will remember forever. In some places, you're supposed to bow slightly while shaking. In others, you maintain intense eye contact the entire time, which feels less like a greeting and more like the opening move in a staring contest. Some cultures shake hands gently, barely gripping at all, which makes Westerners think they're being insulted. Meanwhile, the person offering the gentle handshake thinks you're trying to crush their metacarpals into dust. We've taken a simple medieval safety check and turned it into an international incident waiting to happen. And let's talk about the pandemic for a second. When COVID-19 hit, suddenly everyone realised that shaking hands was disgusting. We've been touching strangers' hands, then touching our faces, then wondering why we're all sick all the time. For a brief, beautiful moment, we had permission to stop. We could just wave, nod, maybe do a little bow. Some people tried the elbow bump, which looked ridiculous, but at least made sense from a hygiene standpoint. But now, we're right back to shaking hands. Because apparently, we'd rather risk disease than break a tradition invented by armed medieval paranoids who thought everyone was trying to murder them. Here's the thing. The handshake made sense in 1347. It served a genuine purpose. But in 2025, it's purely theatrical. You're not checking for weapons. You're performing a ritual that signals, I am a normal person who understands social customs. Please hire me or approve of my existence. We've kept the gesture but lost the meaning. And before you say, well, it's about showing respect, about connecting with another human being, let me stop you right there. There are dozens of ways to show respect that don't involve touching a stranger's potentially unwashed hand. The Japanese bow, the Indian namaste, the Vulcan salute, which frankly should have caught on by now because it's both hygienic and nerdy. But no, we're stuck with the handshake, this medieval relic that we've dressed up in business casual and pretended is sophisticated. You walk into a meeting, and everyone expects you to grab their hand and squeeze it like you're testing a cantaloupe for ripeness. And if you don't, if you politely decline, say you'd rather not because you have a cold or you're just not a hand-touching person, suddenly you're the weird one. You're the person who doesn't understand basic social interaction. Meanwhile, you're the only one in the room who's realised we're all just following instructions from people who died 700 years ago. So tonight, the next time you shake someone's hand, maybe take a second to appreciate the absurdity. You're participating in a tradition invented by suspicious, unwashed medieval people who were so afraid of being stabbed that they had to physically grab each other's weapon hands just to have a conversation. We've kept it going for centuries not because it makes sense, but because we're all too polite to admit that maybe, just maybe, we could come up with a better way to say hello, but we won't. Because that's not how tradition works. We just keep shaking, keep gripping, keep judging each other's hand strength, and keep pretending we're not all participating in a medieval security theatre that stopped being relevant sometime around the invention of gunpowder. Welcome to the handshake. It's been pointless for 400 years, and we're never letting it go. Now let's talk about why you had to suffer through wearing a tie to your cousin's wedding last summer, or why women are still expected to teeter around in heels at formal events. Spoiler alert, it's all medieval nonsense. In the Middle Ages, clothing wasn't about comfort or practicality. It was a walking billboard of your social status, and the more impractical your outfit, the better. Think about it. If you were a medieval noble, you couldn't just walk around in comfortable, sensible clothing. That would suggest you actually did things, like work, or move around, or heaven forbid, sweat. No. Your outfit had to scream, I'm so wealthy that I can afford to wear clothing that makes basic human activities nearly impossible. Long flowing robes that drag through mud and feces-filled streets, sleeves so long they practically touch the ground, shoes with points so extended you had to tie them to your knees just to walk. It was all a massive, expensive signal that you didn't have to do anything useful. The nobility wanted everyone to know at a glance that they were too important for functionality. And if you were dressed practically, in clothes you could actually bend over in or run in or, God forbid, work in, everyone knew you were a peasant. Clothing was a caste system you wore on your body. And here we are, centuries later, still playing the same game. Your boss can't just let you wear comfortable clothes to the office. No. You need to signal that you're serious, professional, respectable. Which apparently means men have to wrap a decorative noose around their necks every morning. Let's talk about ties for a second. These strips of fabric serve absolutely no function. They don't keep you warm. They don't protect you from anything. They literally just hang there, getting caught indoors, dipping into your soup, occasionally strangling you if you lean forward too enthusiastically. And yet men are expected to wear them to job interviews, court appearances, funerals, and anywhere else society has deemed important. The necktie evolved from Croatian mercenaries in the 17th century who wore decorative scarves. which itself was an evolution of the medieval neckwear meant to show off expensive fabrics. It was never practical. It was always about status, always about proving you belonged to the class of people who could afford to wrap silk around their throats for no reason. And you know what's truly insane? We've collectively decided that a man without a tie isn't sufficiently serious. You could be the most qualified person in the room, but if you show up to a board meeting without that little strip of patterned fabric, suddenly your credibility is questionable. We're literally judging competence based on whether someone's following a dress code invented by medieval peacocks. Now let's talk about women's formal wear, which is somehow even worse. High heels, the torture devices that women are expected to wear to look professional or elegant or wedding appropriate. Do you know where high heels came from? Persian cavalry in the 15th century. They were designed to help soldiers keep their feet in stirrups while riding horses and firing arrows. Then European aristocrats saw them and thought, you know what would be great? If we made these completely impractical for anything other than standing still and looking ornamental. By the 17th century, both men and women of the nobility were tottering around in high heels to demonstrate that they were so wealthy they didn't need to walk anywhere efficiently. The higher the heel, the more useless you were, and the more useless you were, the more important you must be. Eventually, men stopped wearing heels, probably because someone realized they looked ridiculous. But women got stuck with them. And now, in 2025, women are still expected to wear these medieval status symbols to job interviews, weddings, and fancy dinners. They're still expected to hobble around in shoes that damage their feet, ankles, knees, and backs, all to signal that they're dressed appropriately. Appropriately for what, exactly? For medieval court? For demonstrating that they value appearance over mobility? For proving they're willing to endure pain for the sake of tradition? And it's not just heels. It's the entire concept of formal wear for women. Dresses that require special undergarments, outfits that can't be washed normally, clothes that restrict movement and require constant adjustment. Meanwhile, men get to wear basically the same thing to every formal event. Suit, tie, done. Uncomfortable? Yes. But at least it's a uniform level of discomfort. Women have to navigate an entire minefield of unwritten rules. Too much colour and you're unprofessional. Not enough colour and you're boring. Skirt too short and you're inappropriate. Skirt too long and you're frumpy. Heels too high and you're trying too hard. Heels too low and you're not trying hard enough. It's exhausting, it's expensive, and it's all rooted in medieval ideas about how women should present themselves as decorative objects. Here's the really maddening part. We all know this is ridiculous. Everyone wearing formal clothes is uncomfortable. Everyone wants to go home and put on sweatpants. Everyone agrees that judging someone's professionalism based on their outfit is superficial and stupid, and yet we keep doing it. Because if you're the one person who shows up to the wedding in jeans, or the job interview in sneakers, you're not making a statement about the absurdity of dress codes. You're just the person who doesn't understand the rules. You're the outsider, the one who can't be trusted to conform, the one who clearly doesn't take this seriously. We've taken medieval status signalling and rebranded it as professionalism. We've taken aristocratic impracticality and called it elegance. We've taken clothing designed specifically to show that you are too wealthy to do anything useful and turned it into the standard for success. And the worst part? We've normalised the discomfort. Men just accept that ties are uncomfortable. Women just accept that heels hurt. We've decided that looking formal requires suffering, and we've all collectively agreed that this is fine, this is normal, this is just what you do, but it's not normal, it's medieval. It's a holdover from a time when your clothing literally determined your worth as a human being, when sumptuary laws dictated what fabrics you were legally allowed to wear based on your social class, when showing up in the wrong outfit could get you fined or arrested or worse. We like to think we've evolved past all that. We like to think we're modern, rational, that we make decisions based on logic rather than tradition. But then we wake up on a Saturday morning, realise we have a formal event, and spend an hour squeezing into uncomfortable clothes that serve no purpose other than signalling that we understand and respect arbitrary social conventions invented by people who died before electricity was discovered. So the next time you're straightening your tie or strapping on those heels, take a moment to appreciate what you're really doing. You're participating in a medieval status ritual, proving that you're willing to endure discomfort for the sake of appearances, demonstrating that you understand the rules even if they make no sense. You're a peasant in a lord's clothing, still playing dress-up for an audience that died 600 years ago. And your feet hurt. You've been yelled at for putting your elbows on the table. You've been corrected for holding your fork wrong. You've definitely been judged for eating too quickly or making the wrong kind of noise while chewing. And you know what? All of that comes from medieval dining halls where the stakes were slightly higher, specifically because everyone at the table had a knife, was drunk on weak ale, and held grudges like they were family heirlooms. Let's start with the elbows on the table thing, which your grandmother probably drilled into you with the intensity of a military sergeant. In medieval times, this rule actually made sense. Tables were narrow, crowded, and often just planks of wood balanced on trestles. If you leaned your elbows on the table, you risked tipping the whole thing over, sending everyone's food, drink, and eating daggers sliding into laps and onto the floor. Also, and this is important, people ate differently back then. You didn't have your own plate. You shared a trencher, a thick slice of stale bread that served as both plate and food, with the person next to you. If you sprawled your elbows out, you were literally invading someone else's eating space, and that person, remember, had a knife, a sharp one, that they'd just been using to stab meat. So keeping your elbows off the table wasn't about etiquette. It was about not starting a stabbing incident over elbow placement. But now we have stable tables, individual plates, and a general agreement not to stab dinner guests. And yet, put your elbows on the table at a formal dinner and watch the judgment roll in. You'll get side eyes from across the table, passive-aggressive comments from your aunt, maybe even a sharp word from the host, all because you violated a rule designed to prevent medieval furniture disasters. Then there's the fork thing. Oh, the fork thing. There's apparently a correct way to hold a fork, and if you're doing it wrong, people will notice and silently downgrade their opinion of you. In America, you're supposed to switch hands after cutting. Fork in the left hand to hold the food, knife in the right to cut, then switch the fork to your right hand to actually eat. In Europe, you keep the fork in your left hand the entire time like a civilized person who doesn't have time for unnecessary utensil juggling. But here's the thing. Forks barely existed in medieval Europe. They were considered effeminate, unnecessary, even sinful. The church argued that God gave you fingers, so using a fork was an insult to divine design. Most people just stabbed their food with their personal daggers and ate with their hands. Forks didn't become standard until the 16th or 17th century, and even then they were seen as pretentious. So all these rules about proper fork holding, they're not ancient wisdom. They're relatively recent inventions by people who wanted to distinguish themselves from the lower classes. If you held your fork a certain way, it signalled that you'd been trained in proper etiquette, that you came from a family with money and education. It was never about efficiency or hygiene. It was about proving you belonged to the right social class, and we're still doing it. We're still judging people based on which hand they hold their fork in, like we're all secretly medieval nobles checking everyone's credentials at dinner. Let's talk about chewing with your mouth closed, a rule that seems so obvious, so fundamental, that it barely needs stating. Except in medieval times, this wasn't a rule at all. People ate with their mouths open, talked while chewing, belched freely, and generally treated meals like a competitive sport. The only real rule was don't spit bones directly at someone's face, and even that was more of a guideline. The emphasis on quiet, close-mouthed chewing came later, during the Renaissance, when European courts started importing etiquette rules from Italy and France. Suddenly, eating became a performance. You had to chew quietly, delicately, without making disgusting sounds that reminded people you were an animal consuming other dead animals. It was all about pretending that eating wasn't a messy biological necessity, but rather a refined, almost spiritual activity. Which is hilarious, because medieval feasts were absolute chaos. People threw bones on the floor for the dogs, they wiped their greasy hands on their clothes or the tablecloth, they drank until they passed out face first in their trenchers. Knights literally brought their hunting dogs to the table and fed them scraps mid-meal. The idea of quiet, dignified dining would have baffled them completely. But somewhere along the line, we decided that eating should be silent and controlled. And now, if you chew too loudly or slurp your soup, or God forbid make any kind of satisfied noise while eating, you're disgusting. You're uncivilized. You're the person who never learned proper manners. Never mind that in many cultures, making noise while eating is a compliment to the chef. Never mind that the only reason we eat quietly is because some Renaissance courtiers decided it made them look more refined than the peasants. We've taken their arbitrary rules and turned them into moral judgments, and don't even get me started on the speed of eating. You're supposed to pace yourself, take small bites, put your utensils down between bites, make conversation. Eating quickly is seen as rude, greedy, or lower class. But in medieval times, if you didn't eat quickly, you didn't eat at all. Food was served communally, and if you were polite and waited your turn, the person next to you would eat your portion too. Medieval dining was basically survival of the fastest. You grabbed what you could, you ate as much as possible, and you didn't share unless someone held a knife to your throat, which they might. The idea of leisurely, paced dining was for rich people who had so much food they could afford to waste time between bites. Now we've flipped it. Eating quickly signals that you're unsophisticated, that you don't appreciate the food, that you weren't raised properly. Meanwhile, eating slowly and making a big show of savouring every bite signals refinement and class. We've taken a survival strategy and turned it into a character flaw. Here's what's truly wild. None of these rules make food taste better. None of them make the dining experience more enjoyable. In fact, most of them make eating more stressful. You can't relax. You have to constantly monitor your elbow placement, your fork grip, your chewing volume, your eating speed. You're so busy performing proper etiquette that you barely taste your food. And for what? So that everyone at the table can collectively agree that yes, we all know the rules, we're all following the same arbitrary script written by medieval nobles who were terrified of looking like peasants. The irony is that medieval nobles, the people who supposedly embodied sophistication and manners, ate like absolute animals by our standards. They belched at the table, they gnawed on bones, they wiped their mouths on their sleeves, they drank to excess and frequently vomited. The manners we associate with formal dining today would have been completely foreign to them. We haven't preserved medieval etiquette. We've invented a completely new set of rules, slapped the word traditional on them, and convinced ourselves we're honouring some ancient code of conduct. We're not. We're just making each other uncomfortable at dinner parties. So the next time someone corrects your fork grip or tells you to keep your elbows off the table, remember, you're not violating sacred rules of civilized behaviour. You're just failing to properly execute a performance invented by insecure aristocrats who needed elaborate rules to distinguish themselves from everyone else, and your food's getting cold while you worry about it. Picture this. You're in a quiet office, someone sneezes, and like clockwork, 3 people say, "Bless you," in unison. Why? What are we blessing? What are we protecting them from? Well, buckle up because the answer is medieval superstition at its absolute finest. In the Middle Ages, people genuinely believed that when you sneezed, your soul tried to escape your body. Yes, you read that right. Medieval people thought your soul was just hanging out in your body, loosely tethered like a balloon on a string, and a good sneeze could send it flying out through your nose or mouth. And once your soul escaped, demons could swoop in and possess your now vacant body. Or your soul might just wander off and get lost, leaving you a soulless husk stumbling around the village scaring livestock. The solution? Say a blessing immediately. God bless you was essentially a medieval emergency protocol. A verbal safety net to catch the soul before it could escape. It was spiritual first aid. You sneezed, someone blessed you, and boom, your soul stayed put. Crisis averted. Demons disappointed. This belief wasn't just casual superstition. People took it seriously. Really seriously. During the plague years, when the Black Death was killing roughly half of Europe, sneezing became even more terrifying because it was often one of the first symptoms. A sneeze could mean you were hours away from developing buboes and dying in agony. So saying "God bless you" took on an extra layer of urgency. It was part blessing, part prayer, part "please don't give me whatever you have." Pope Gregory I allegedly made the blessing mandatory during a plague outbreak in the 6th century, which means we've been doing this for roughly 1,500 years. 15 centuries of reflexively blessing strangers, because a pope once decided souls were escape artists and needed verbal restraints. And here we are, in the 21st century, still doing it. We know souls don't escape through sneezes. We know demons aren't waiting to possess sneezers. We know that sneezing is just your body's way of expelling irritants through your nasal passages at speeds up to 100 miles per hour. It's biology, not spiritual warfare. But try not saying "bless you" in a professional setting. Just try it. Someone sneezes, and you stay silent. Watch what happens. The sneezer will pause, confused. Other people will glance at you like you've committed a social crime. Someone else will jump in to say bless you, filling the awkward void you created with your silence. You'll be labelled rude, inconsiderate, or just weird. We've turned a medieval demon prevention tactic into a mandatory social courtesy. And if you don't participate, you're the problem. And it gets even stranger when you think about the mechanics of the ritual. Someone sneezes, often covering their face, often embarrassed because they've just explosively expelled germs into the shared air. And then multiple people bless them, turning a brief personal biological event into a group activity. The sneezer then has to say thank you, multiple times, to multiple people for blessing them. Think about that. You've just sneezed. You're probably feeling gross. You might be getting sick. You definitely just sprayed microscopic droplets everywhere despite your best efforts. And now you have to perform gratitude to acknowledge that other people have protected your soul from demonic possession. It's exhausting, and it's completely unnecessary. But we do it anyway because not doing it feels wrong in a way we can't quite articulate. It's like our brains are still running software from 1347, and nobody's bothered to update it. In other languages, the blessing takes different forms but carries the same bizarre weight. In Spanish, you say salud, which means health. In German, Gesundheit, same thing. In Italian, salute. All of them are basically saying, hey, I hope you don't die from whatever just happened. Which, historically, was a legitimate concern. Now it's just a reflex. And here's where it gets really weird. We don't bless other bodily functions. Nobody says bless you when someone coughs. Even though coughing is far more likely to spread disease, nobody blesses you when you burp, hiccup, or yawn. Sneezing got special treatment because medieval people decided it was the specific bodily function that put your immortal soul at risk. We've kept the tradition but lost the context, so now we're just blessing random respiratory events for no reason anyone can remember. Some people have tried to escape the tradition. They sneeze and immediately say, I'm okay, or excuse me, or nothing at all, hoping to skip past the blessing phase. But it doesn't work. People will still bless you. They can't help it. The urge to bless a sneeze is so deeply ingrained that it overrides social cues. You can literally say, please don't say bless you, and people will still say it. They'll apologise afterward, but they'll say it first. It's like a verbal tic we've all agreed to share. A collective compulsion left over from a time when we thought sneezing could kill you in supernatural ways instead of just the regular biological ways. And let's talk about what happens when someone sneezes multiple times in a row. The first sneeze gets a bless you. The second sneeze gets another bless you, maybe less enthusiastic. The third sneeze gets a weary bless you or nothing at all because at some point we all silently agree that this person's soul is either secure or not worth the effort. By the fourth or fifth sneeze, people just feel bad for you, and the blessing ritual collapses into awkward silence. There's no official rule for how many times you're supposed to bless someone. We just collectively sense when it's time to stop. Which proves that even we don't really take this seriously. If we genuinely believed souls were at risk, we'd bless every single sneeze with equal vigour, but we don't, because deep down, we know it's theatre. The really maddening part is that this blessing ritual creates social anxiety around sneezing. People try to suppress sneezes in meetings, in libraries, in quiet spaces, not because sneezing is inherently disruptive, but because they don't want to trigger the blessing response. They don't want to force multiple people to acknowledge their sneeze and then have to thank everyone individually. We've made sneezing a completely involuntary biological function into a social event that requires participation and gratitude. It's like if every time you blinked, people felt obligated to say good blink and you had to say thank you. It would be absurd. And yet, that's exactly what we're doing with sneezes. Some cultures have abandoned the practice. In many parts of Asia, people don't say anything when someone sneezes. The sneezer doesn't apologise. Nobody blesses them. Life just continues. And guess what? Their souls are fine. Demons have not mass-possessed the population. Everything is completely normal. But in Western cultures, we're stuck. We're trapped in a loop created by medieval people who thought the human body was a poorly designed soul container that needed constant verbal maintenance. And we're so committed to the bit that we've made it rude not to participate. So tonight, the next time someone sneezes and you automatically say bless you, take a second to appreciate what you're really doing. You're performing a ritual designed to prevent demons from stealing souls through nasal passages. You're reciting a spell created during the plague years when sneezing meant death. You're participating in 500 years of unbroken tradition based on medical knowledge that was wrong about literally everything. And you're doing it because if you don't, Karen from accounting will think you're rude. Welcome to modern civilization, where we're all still taking orders from medieval people who thought souls could sneeze themselves loose. Bless you for making it this far. Let's talk about why you, or someone you know, is walking around with a small fortune on their left ring finger. The tradition of wearing a wedding ring on the fourth finger of the left hand dates back to ancient Rome. But medieval Europe ran with it and turned it into an unbreakable rule. Why that finger specifically? Because medieval physicians, who also thought bloodletting cured everything, believed there was a special vein running from that finger directly to the heart. They called it the vena amoris, the vein of love. It was supposedly a direct highway from your ring finger to your heart, making that finger the only appropriate place to display your eternal commitment. Romantic, right? Except here's the small problem. It doesn't exist. There is no special vein connecting your ring finger to your heart. Your ring finger has the same boring network of veins and arteries as every other finger. Medical science has known this for centuries, but did we stop putting rings on that finger? Did we collectively say, oh, well, that was based on completely fictional anatomy, maybe we should reconsider? Of course not. We doubled down. We made it the only acceptable finger for wedding rings, and now if you wear your wedding ring on any other finger, people assume you're either divorced, foreign, or making some kind of statement. Medieval people took this imaginary vein and built an entire symbolic system around it. The ring itself, a circle with no beginning or end, represented eternal love. The precious metal, gold or silver, represented the value of the commitment, and placing it on the finger with the direct line to the heart. That was the ultimate romantic gesture, a physical connection between your marriage and your literal life force. Never mind that they were wrong about the anatomy. Never mind that hearts don't actually control love or emotions. That's your brain, specifically your limbic system. Never mind that if we're being truly romantic, we should probably wear rings on our heads to be closer to the actual organ, responsible for attachment and affection. We stuck with the finger because tradition doesn't care about accuracy. And it wasn't just about the vein. Medieval marriage ceremonies involved elaborate ring rituals that we're still performing today. The priest would bless the ring, invoking God to sanctify the metal and the marriage. The groom would then place the ring on the bride's thumb and say, "In the name of the Father," then the index finger, and of the Son, then the middle finger, and of the Holy Spirit. Finally the ring finger. Amen. And there it stayed, locked in place by the Trinity itself. Women got rings, men often didn't. Because medieval marriage wasn't about mutual commitment, it was about ownership. The ring marked the woman as taken, as property, as belonging to her husband. It was a visible sign to other men. This one's claimed, back off. Men didn't need rings because they weren't property. They were doing the owning. Eventually, probably after enough wives pointed out the hypocrisy, men started wearing rings too. But the tradition of the ring as a marker of ownership never fully disappeared. Even today, people glance at your left hand to check your relationship status before deciding whether to flirt with you. The ring is still functioning as a medieval keep-away sign. And let's talk about the expense of these things. The modern engagement ring industry, which convinced everyone that you need to spend 2 to 3 months' salary on a diamond ring or you don't really love your partner, is obviously a more recent invention, courtesy of De Beers and their brilliant marketing in the 1930s. But the idea that rings should be expensive, that they should represent financial sacrifice, that's medieval. In medieval times, the ring's value demonstrated the groom's ability to provide for his wife. A cheap ring meant you were a cheap husband, probably unreliable, possibly poor. An expensive ring meant you were a good catch, someone who could keep his wife in reasonable comfort, or at least in decorative metal. The ring was a down payment on marriage, a security deposit proving you were serious. We've kept that logic intact. You're supposed to stress about the ring, save for it, possibly go into debt for it. It's meant to hurt a little, financially speaking, because if it doesn't hurt, how will everyone know you're truly committed? Never mind that you could use that money for a house, or paying off student loans, or literally anything practical. No, You need to transform several $1,000s into a tiny rock on a band of metal, place it on a finger because of a vein that doesn't exist, and call it romance. And God forbid you lose the ring. Lose your wedding ring and people react like you've lost your marriage. They gasp. They offer sympathy. They look at your naked finger with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Some people refuse to take their rings off ever. Not for the gym, not for surgery, not for anything, because the ring isn't just jewellery. It's a talisman. It's proof. It's the physical manifestation of a promise, and removing it feels like breaking that promise, even temporarily, which is insane when you think about it. It's a piece of metal. It doesn't contain your marriage. Your marriage exists in your relationship, your commitment, your daily choices. The ring is just a symbol. But we've imbued it with so much meaning that it's become more important than the thing it represents. And then there's the question of which hand. In most Western countries, it's the left hand. In some Eastern European countries, it's the right. In Germany, you wear the engagement ring on the left and move it to the right after marriage. In Brazil, couples wear rings on the right hand when engaged and switch to the left after the wedding. Every culture has different rules, all of them treated as sacred tradition. None of them based on anything more substantial than we've always done it this way. The whole system is arbitrary. The finger is arbitrary. The hand is arbitrary. The idea that you need a ring at all is arbitrary. But try suggesting to an engaged couple that maybe they could skip the rings and save some money. See what happens. You'll be met with shock, maybe offence, definitely confusion. Because the ring isn't optional. It's mandatory. It's proof to the world that you're married, and without it, people won't believe you. We've turned a medical error from ancient Rome into an unshakable requirement for modern marriage. We point to a finger because of a vein that never existed. We spend fortunes on metal and stones because medieval people decided marriage should be expensive to prove you're serious. We panic if we lose a ring because we've been taught that the symbol is somehow more important than the substance. And here's the truly bizarre part. Even people who know the Vena Amoris is fictional, even people who think the whole wedding ring industry is a scam, even people who pride themselves on being logical and skeptical, still wear their rings on that specific finger. Because it's not about the vein anymore. It's not even about romance. It's about conformity. It's about signalling to society that you're following the rules, that you understand the script, that you're a married person who knows how to marry a person correctly. The ring has to be on the fourth finger of the left hand because that's where everyone else's ring is, and doing it differently would require explanation, would invite questions, would mark you as someone who doesn't respect tradition. So we keep doing it. We keep spending money we don't have on rings we don't need to place on fingers for reasons that were never true. We keep performing a ritual that medieval people invented based on medical knowledge that was completely, demonstrably wrong. And we call it romance. We call it tradition. We call it meaningful. But really it's just another example of us following instructions from people who died centuries ago without bothering to ask if those instructions ever made sense in the first place. Your ring finger isn't special. The vein doesn't exist. But your finger's stuck with that ring anyway, and you probably wouldn't have it any other way. You've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. Someone mentioned something good, and immediately, almost involuntarily, we reach out and knock on wood. Knock, 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 crisis averted, fate appeased. But why? Why are we, modern humans with smartphones and space stations, still tapping on wooden tables like we're summoning forest spirits? Because that's exactly what we're doing. Or at least that's what medieval people thought they were doing. The tradition of knocking on wood goes back to pagan Europe, long before Christianity swept through and told everyone their tree gods were actually demons. Ancient pagans believed that benevolent spirits lived inside trees, particularly oak trees, which were considered sacred. When you needed protection, luck, or divine intervention, you'd literally knock on a tree to wake up the spirit inside and ask for help. Christians tried to rebrand this later, claiming that knocking on wood was actually about touching the wooden cross of Christ, invoking divine protection through holy lumber. But let's be honest, it was tree spirits first. We were asking trees for favours long before we had organised religion. The medieval version of knocking on wood was more elaborate. You didn't just tap casually. You knocked 3 times, representing the Holy Trinity. You did it with intention, with focus, sometimes while muttering a prayer or blessing. It was a whole production. The wood had to be untreated, natural. blessed by proximity to holy things. You couldn't just knock on any wood. It had to be the right wood, touched the right way, or it wouldn't work. Fast forward to today, and we've kept the knocking but lost the theology. Now we knock on wood reflexively, usually after saying something that tempts fate. I haven't been sick all year, knock on wood. My car's been running great lately, knock knock. The project's going smoothly, tap tap tap. We're essentially trying to prevent the universe from hearing our good fortune and deciding to ruin it out of spite, which, when you think about it, is a pretty bleak worldview. We've collectively decided that the universe is petty and jealous, that speaking positively about our lives will attract cosmic punishment, and that the only defense is to perform a small ritual involving wooden furniture. It's medieval peasant thinking, dressed up in business casual. And here's the really weird part. We know it doesn't work. Knock on wood or don't knock on wood, the outcome will be the same. Your car will break down based on mechanical failure, not because you bragged about its reliability. You'll get sick based on exposure to pathogens, not because you mentioned your good health out loud. The universe is not listening to your conversations and plotting revenge. But try not knocking on wood after tempting fate. Just try it. Say something optimistic and then sit there with your hands in your lap. You'll feel uncomfortable, anxious, like you've left something undone. Other people will notice and might even reach over to knock on wood for you because they're now worried that your hubris will somehow affect them too. It's contagious magical thinking. And it's not just wood anymore. We've expanded the rule to include any wooden surface no matter how processed or artificial. Knock on a laminate table, counts. Tap a wooden picture frame, good enough. Touch a pencil, close enough. We've turned a ritual about communing with tree spirits into a game of find the nearest wood-adjacent object and touch it before the universe notices. Some people, finding themselves in rooms with no wood, will knock on their own heads. Yes, their heads. As if their skull is an acceptable substitute for an oak tree blessed by ancient spirits. We've gone from knocking on sacred groves to knocking on our own foreheads, and somehow convinced ourselves the magic still works. The phrase itself has become shorthand for, I hope this doesn't jinx me. People say knock on wood even when there's no wood nearby, as if saying the words provides the same protection as the gesture. It's evolved from ritual to verbal tick, from superstition to punctuation. We're not really expecting protection anymore, we're just following a script. And different cultures have their own versions. In Turkish you say şeytan kulağına kurşun, which means may the devil put lead in his ear, because apparently the devil is also listening to your conversations and needs to be deafened. In Yiddish you say canine horror, may no evil eye befall it, which at least is honest about trying to ward off cosmic jealousy. But the English-speaking world stuck with knocking on wood, which sounds quaint and harmless and definitely doesn't make you sound like you believe in tree spirits. Except we do believe, sort of. Not consciously, not intellectually, but in that superstitious lizard brain part that still thinks patterns, cause outcomes and rituals provide protection. The part that knows correlation isn't causation but feels like maybe, just maybe, it could be. The part that would rather knock on wood than risk being wrong. And knock on wood has become so ingrained in our language that we use it even when we're not superstitious. Rational, skeptical people who mock astrology and laugh at fortune cookies will still knock on wood after making a positive statement. When asked why, they'll shrug and say it's just habit, or it can't hurt, or I don't actually believe it but I do it anyway. Which is basically admitting that medieval superstition has hijacked our behaviour without our permission. We've automated the ritual. It requires no thought, no belief, no conscious decision. Someone mentions good luck, and your hand moves toward wood like it's magnetically attracted. You might not even realise you're doing it until after you've done it. It's muscle memory inherited from people who genuinely believed trees contained protective spirits. And here's where it gets really irrational. We knock on wood for other people. Someone else tempts fate, and we'll knock on wood on their behalf like we're providing supernatural insurance they didn't ask for. We've appointed ourselves as cosmic bodyguards, protecting our friends and family from jinxes through strategic furniture tapping. The ritual has also infected our digital lives. People typing knock on wood or cow in text messages, as if typing the phrase provides the same mystical protection as the physical act. We've translated a pagan ritual into ASCII characters, and somehow expect it to work the same way. It's medieval magic for the internet age. Some psychologists argue that knocking on wood persists because it gives us a sense of control in an uncontrollable world. By performing the ritual, we feel like we're taking action, doing something to protect our good fortune. It's a coping mechanism, a way to manage anxiety about an uncertain future, which is a very kind way of saying we're all still performing pagan tree worship, because it makes us feel slightly less powerless. But even that explanation doesn't quite capture the absurdity. We're not just trying to feel better. We're following a specific script written by people who lived in forests, worshipped trees, and thought spirits could be summoned by knocking. We've preserved the exact gesture, the exact phrase, the exact superstition, and transported it across centuries into a world that would be completely unrecognizable to the people who invented it. Medieval peasants knocked on trees to wake up spirits. We knock on IKEA furniture to prevent jinxes. They believed in magic. We claim not to. And yet, here we are, both knocking on wood, separated by 800 years but united in the conviction that tapping on wooden objects somehow influences fate. The forest spirits are probably confused, or thrilled, hard to say, but they're definitely still getting their daily dose of knocking from millions of people who have no idea why they're doing it. So the next time you knock on wood, take a moment to appreciate what you're really doing. You're performing a pagan ritual, appeasing tree spirits, warding off cosmic jealousy, and participating in a tradition that predates Christianity, survives skepticism, and refuses to die no matter how irrational it becomes. And you're doing it because someone 1,000 years ago decided that wood was magic, and we all just went along with it. Knock, knock, knock. The spirits thank you for your service. Spill some salt at dinner, and someone at the table will immediately tell you to throw a pinch over your left shoulder. You might do it without thinking, maybe even laugh about it. But this tradition is pure medieval paranoia mixed with expensive commodity anxiety. In the Middle Ages, salt was ridiculously valuable. We're not talking kind of expensive. We're talking Roman soldiers were paid in salt expensive. The word salary literally comes from sal, Latin for salt, because salt was currency. It preserved food, made terrible medieval meals marginally edible, and was essential for survival in a world without refrigeration. Spilling salt was like dropping your wallet in a fire. It was a genuine financial disaster. So when you spilled salt, you weren't just clumsy. You were wasteful, careless, possibly cursed. Because only someone touched by bad luck or evil would be so unfortunate as to spill something so precious. Medieval people looked at spilled salt and saw omens, bad energy, and the fingerprints of Satan himself. Yes, Satan. Because of course medieval people blamed the devil for kitchen accidents. The logic went like this. Spilling salt was bad luck, obviously, because you just wasted valuable resources. But why did you spill it? Because the devil, who spent his time lurking around kitchens apparently, had bumped your elbow or whispered distractions in your ear. The spill was evidence of demonic interference in your dinner preparations. And where was the devil standing? Behind you. Specifically, behind your left shoulder. The left side, in medieval Christian symbolism, was the sinister side. That's not metaphorical. Sinister literally means left in Latin. The left was associated with evil, weakness, and Satan. The right side was good, holy, protected by your guardian angel. So when bad things happened, they came from the left. And when you needed to fight back against evil, you aimed left. The solution to spilled salt was immediate and specific. Grab a pinch of the spilled salt with your right hand, your good hand, your holy hand, and throw it over your left shoulder directly into the devil's face. This would blind him temporarily, giving you time to pray, cross yourself, or just finish dinner without further demonic interference. It was spiritual self-defense using sodium chloride as a weapon, and we're still doing it. In 2025, in kitchens with refrigerators and electric lights and zero devils, we're still throwing salt over our shoulders because medieval people decided Satan hung out behind them, waiting to cause problems. The tradition is so ingrained that people do it automatically. Spill salt, throw salt, move on. Most people don't even know why they're doing it. If you ask them, they'll say it's for good luck, or to reverse bad luck, or just because that's what you're supposed to do. The devil doesn't even enter the conversation anymore. We've secularized demon blinding into a harmless superstition, but the details matter. It has to be over your left shoulder. Right shoulder doesn't work. That's where your guardian angel hangs out, and throwing salt at your guardian angel is just rude. It has to be with your right hand. Left-handed? Too bad. Use your right anyway, or the magic doesn't work. And it has to be a pinch of the spilled salt specifically. Going to the salt shaker and grabbing fresh salt is cheating. The ritual requires you to use the cursed devil-touched salt to blind the devil. It's spiritual irony. Some versions of the tradition add extra steps. You're supposed to throw the salt behind you without looking, because looking at the devil directly is dangerous. You might make eye contact, which could result in possession, bad dreams, or 7 years of bad luck, depending on which medieval village elder you asked. So you throw blind, trusting that your aim is good and that Satan is exactly where you think he is. Other versions insist you have to throw the salt 3 times, once for each member of the Holy Trinity, because 1 pinch might not be enough to blind a determined demon. 3 pinches ensure maximum coverage and divine backup. And if you spill salt and don't throw it over your shoulder, well, that depends on who you ask. Some traditions say you'll have bad luck for 7 years. Others say you'll have a fight with a friend or family member before the day is done. A few claim you've just invited the devil to stick around and cause more problems, which could range from burned dinner to full-scale possession. The anxiety around spilled salt is so strong that even people who don't believe in the devil, who've never been to church, who mock superstitions openly, will still grab that pinch and throw it backward, just in case. Because what if? What if this one time, the medieval Christians were right and there's a devil behind your left shoulder waiting to ruin your life unless you throw seasoning at him? We can't risk it, so we throw the salt. And here's the really maddening part. Salt isn't valuable anymore. You can buy a container of salt for less than $1. Spilling salt is mildly annoying because now you have to clean it up, but it's not a financial crisis. It's not a sign of divine disfavour. It's just gravity winning a fight against your coordination. And yet we treat it like a spiritual emergency that requires immediate ritual intervention. The tradition has also created a strange social pressure. If you spill salt and don't throw it over your shoulder, someone at the table will remind you. They'll point it out, sometimes urgently, as if you're about to trigger a curse that will affect everyone present. You're not just risking your own bad luck. You're risking the collective fortune of the dinner table. Your failure to perform the ritual becomes everyone's problem. And if you're feeling rebellious and refuse to throw the salt, if you say, no, I'm not throwing salt over my shoulder because I don't believe in medieval devil-blinding rituals, you'll be met with uncomfortable silence, nervous laughter, and the distinct sense that you violated an unspoken social contract. Someone else might lean over and throw the salt for you, just to be safe. We've made it impossible to escape. The ritual is self-enforcing. Even skeptics participate because not participating is socially awkward and potentially unlucky. And who wants to risk bad luck over something as simple as throwing a pinch of salt? There's also the question of what happens if you're eating outside and you spill salt on grass or dirt. Do you still throw it? Can you throw dirt over your shoulder instead? What if you're on a boat and the salt blows back in your face? Does that count? Or have you just salted yourself? The tradition doesn't come with a comprehensive FAQ, so we're all just improvising based on medieval instructions that were never meant to cover modern dining scenarios. Some people have tried to retire the tradition by pointing out that we don't believe in the devil, or at least not a devil who lurks in kitchens waiting to be assaulted with condiments. But the tradition persists because it's not really about the devil anymore. It's about continuity, about participating in something humans have been doing for centuries, about feeling connected to a long chain of salt throwers stretching back through time, which sounds almost meaningful until you remember that the thing connecting us is a ritual designed to blind a supernatural entity who may or may not exist using a household seasoning. Salt has been demoted from currency to commodity, from precious resource to kitchen staple you buy in bulk and forget about. But our anxiety about spilling it, our compulsion to throw it over our shoulders, our fear of breaking the ritual, all of that remains intact. We've kept the superstition long after we've lost the circumstances that made it make sense. So tonight, if you spill salt, you'll probably throw a pinch over your left shoulder. You might laugh about it. You might not even consciously think about why you're doing it. But somewhere in the back of your mind, in that superstitious corner where medieval fears still live, you'll feel a little better knowing you've blinded the devil one more time. And he's probably getting really tired of having salt thrown in his face. But that's what he gets for hanging around medieval kitchens and never updating his haunting strategy. Let's talk about why millions of people still get nervous when Friday lands on the 13th day of the month. Hotels skip the 13th floor. Airlines avoid having a row 13. Some people won't even leave the house. And it all goes back to medieval Christianity, biblical betrayal, and a really unfortunate day for the Knights Templar. First, let's break down why Friday and 13 are individually cursed. Because medieval people were efficient and decided to fear them separately before combining them into a superstition power couple. Friday was unlucky because it was the day Jesus was crucified. Good Friday, they called it, which is some impressive rebranding considering it was the day the Son of God was executed. Medieval Christians treated every Friday with a mix of reverence and dread. You weren't supposed to start new projects on Friday, get married on Friday, or make any important decisions on Friday because it was the day everything went wrong for humanity's salvation. Some people wouldn't even cut their nails on Friday because of an old medieval rhyme. Cut them on Friday, you cut them for sorrow, which is a lot of emotional weight to put on basic grooming. Then there's the number 13, which got its bad reputation from multiple sources, all of them medieval or earlier. The Last Supper had 13 people at the table, Jesus and his 12 disciples. The 13th guest was Judas, the betrayer, who left the dinner to go sell out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. So 13 became the number of betrayal, the unlucky spot at the table, the numerical representation of everything going wrong. Norse mythology piled on. At a feast in Valhalla, 12 gods were having a lovely time until Loki, the trickster god and general troublemaker, showed up as the uninvited 13th guest. He arranged for the blind god Herder to kill Balder, the most beloved god, which ruined everyone's evening and plunged the world into darkness. So 13 wasn't just unlucky, it was apocalyptic. Medieval people took these stories and ran with them. Having 13 people at a dinner party became taboo. Someone would refuse to sit down, or a 14th person would be hastily invited, or everyone would just eat standing up in awkward silence. The fear was that if 13 people dined together, one of them would die within the year, which statistically speaking might occasionally be true just because medieval life expectancy was terrible, but that just reinforced the superstition. Now, combine Friday and 13, and you get Friday the 13th, the most unlucky day possible. The historical event that really cemented this in European consciousness was Friday, October 13th, 1307, when King Philip IV of France ordered the mass arrest of the Knights Templar. Hundreds of Templars were rounded up, tortured, and eventually executed on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and various other crimes they probably didn't commit. It was a political purge disguised as religious enforcement, and it happened on a Friday the 13th. The Knights Templar were warrior monks, basically medieval special forces who'd gotten rich and powerful during the Crusades. They were also bankers to kings, which meant they had leverage, wealth, and enemies. King Philip owed them a staggering amount of money, so he decided the easiest way to deal with his debt was to destroy the organisation and seize their assets. The mass arrest on Friday the 13th became legendary, and the date became synonymous with treachery and doom. Whether or not the modern Friday the 13th superstition actually traces back to the Templars is historically debated. Some scholars think it's a later invention, that the association between Friday the 13th and bad luck didn't really solidify until the 19th or 20th century. But medieval people definitely feared both Fridays and the number 13 separately, so combining them into one super unlucky day is very on brand for medieval thinking, and we've kept it going. In 2025, people still plan around Friday the 13th. They avoid scheduling surgeries, postpone weddings, refuse to sign contracts, and generally treat the day like it's radioactive. There's even a clinical phobia named after it, paraskevida which is Greek for fear of Friday the 13th, and sounds like something a medieval scholar made up after too much wine. The hospitality industry has fully embraced the superstition. Hotels routinely skip the 13th floor. You'll go from the 12th floor to the 14th floor, as if the 13th floor doesn't exist or has been banished to another dimension. Airports often avoid Gate 13. Some airlines don't have a row 13. Buildings skip Suite 13. Streets sometimes jump from House 12 to House 14. We've architecturally accommodated a medieval superstition, redesigning our numbering systems to avoid offending people's inherited fears. And it's not just Western culture. Many Asian countries consider the number 4 unlucky because it sounds like the word for death in several languages. So buildings in Asia often skip the 4th floor, the 14th floor, and sometimes every floor with a 4 in it. We've globalized architectural superstition. Every culture has agreed to pretend certain numbers don't exist rather than collectively get over our irrational fears. The economic impact of Friday the 13th is staggering. Analysts estimate that businesses lose hundreds of millions of dollars on Friday the 13th because people avoid travelling, making major purchases, or doing anything that feels risky. It's a medieval superstition with immeasurable GDP impact. We're letting people who died 700 years ago dictate our economic behaviour, and the self-fulfilling prophecy aspect is real. If you believe Friday the 13th is unlucky, you'll be more anxious, more careful, more likely to notice when things go wrong. You'll interpret normal bad luck, spilled coffee, traffic jams, minor inconveniences as proof that the day is cursed. Meanwhile, if those same things happened on Tuesday the 9th, you'd barely notice. We're selectively gathering evidence to confirm a superstition we already believe. Some people lean into it. They throw Friday the 13th parties. They deliberately do risky things to prove the superstition wrong. They adopt black cats, walk under ladders and break mirrors, stacking bad luck on bad luck like they're trying to speedrun curses. It's performative fearlessness, a way of saying I'm too modern and rational to believe in medieval nonsense, which ironically proves they're still thinking about medieval nonsense. And then there's the horror movie franchise that turned Friday the 13th into a brand. Jason Voorhees, the hockey-masked serial killer, has been terrorising fictional teenagers since 1980, which has only reinforced the cultural association between the date and bad things happening. We've taken a medieval superstition and given it a marketing campaign. Now when people hear Friday the 13th, they think of betrayal, bad luck, and a guy with a machete. Excellent cultural evolution. The superstition also creates weird social dynamics. If something bad happens on Friday the 13th, people will nod knowingly and say, well, it is Friday the 13th, as if that explains everything. Car accident, Friday the 13th. Lost your job, Friday the 13th. Stubbed your toe, probably shouldn't have gotten out of bed on Friday the 13th. We've given the date explanatory power, as if it's a causal force rather than an arbitrary position on the calendar. But if you point out that bad things also happen on Thursday the 8th and Monday the 22nd and literally every other day, people will tell you you're missing the point. The point is that Friday the 13th feels unlucky, and feelings don't care about your statistics or your rational arguments. And that's the thing about superstitions. They're not logical. They're not meant to be. They're emotional security blankets, inherited fears, cultural scripts we perform without questioning. Friday the 13th is unlucky because medieval Christians said so, because the Knights Templar were arrested on that day, because 13 people sat at the Last Supper, because Judas was a betrayer, because Loki crashed a party. None of that has any bearing on what will actually happen to you on any given Friday the 13th. You're not more likely to die, get injured, or experience bad luck. The universe doesn't care what day it is, but we care. We've cared for centuries, and we're not stopping anytime soon. So tonight, the next time Friday the 13th rolls around, pay attention to how many people mention it, avoid it, or make jokes about it. Notice how the date itself becomes a character in everyone's day, a villain or a punchline or an excuse. And remember, you're participating in a tradition that started with a crucifixion, got reinforced by a political purge, and has survived centuries of rationalism, scientific advancement, and overwhelming evidence that it's complete nonsense. The Templars are gone. Medieval Christianity has evolved. But Friday the 13th? That's forever. Raise your glass, clink it against someone else's, shout cheers or salud or prost, and drink. It's a universal gesture of goodwill and celebration. Except, like everything else on this list, it started as medieval paranoia. The clinking of glasses was originally meant to slosh liquid from one cup into another, proving that nobody had poisoned the drinks. That's right. Toasting started as a mutual poison check protocol. In medieval times, poisoning was a legitimate concern, especially if you were nobility, had enemies, or owed someone money. Political rivals, disgruntled relatives, ambitious underlings, they all had access to toxins and motivations to use them. Dinner parties weren't just social events, they were potential assassination attempts with appetizers. So before drinking, people would clink their cups together forcefully enough to slosh liquid between vessels. If your drink splashed into mine and mine into yours and we both drank, then neither of us could have poisoned the drinks without also poisoning ourselves. It was mutually assured sobriety, a liquid version of holding hands before jumping off a cliff together. We both drink, or neither of us drinks, and if someone dies, at least we die together. The more vigorous the clink, the more trustworthy you appeared. A gentle tap suggested you were being careful not to mix the drinks, which made you immediately suspicious. A proper medieval toast involves smashing cups together hard enough to create a small tidal wave of wine or ale, proving beyond doubt that you were willing to share the risk, and you had to make eye contact while toasting. Looking away while clinking glasses was considered extremely rude, possibly even evidence of guilt. If you couldn't meet someone's eyes while drinking with them, you were clearly hiding something, probably poison, possibly evil intentions. The eye contact was part of the trust ritual, a way of saying, I see you, you see me, we're both accountable here. In some medieval courts, the host would drink first from a communal cup before passing it around the table. This was the ultimate trust signal. I'm drinking first from the same vessel you'll drink from, so obviously it's not poisoned. Unless I've built up immunity to the poison through years of microdosing, in which case I'm playing a very long game and you're about to have a bad evening. The word toast itself comes from an actual piece of toast. In medieval and Renaissance times, people would drop a piece of spiced or charred bread into wine to improve the flavour, because medieval wine was often terrible, basically vinegar with ambitions. The toast would soak up impurities, add a bit of flavour, and make the wine marginally less likely to kill you. Drinking to someone's health meant you were sharing wine that had been toasted, purified, made safer through the magical properties of burnt bread. Eventually the toast became symbolic. You'd raise your glass to honour someone, and everyone would drink together, no burnt bread required. But the ritual of clinking remained because by that point it was tradition, and tradition doesn't need reasons. Fast forward to today, and we're still clinking glasses. We're still making eye contact, we're still saying cheers or salute or chin-chin or whatever your culture's designated toast phrase is. And we're doing it at weddings, birthday parties, business dinners, bars at 2 a.m, places where poisoning is statistically unlikely, but we clink anyway because that's what you do when you drink in groups. And if you don't participate, if you raise your glass but don't clink, or if you drink before the toast is complete, you'll get looks. People will judge you. Some cultures consider it 7 years of bad sex if you don't make eye contact during the toast, which is a very specific curse, and suggests that medieval people were concerned about more than just poison. The ritual has also evolved regional variations that medieval people would find baffling. In Sweden, you're supposed to make eye contact with everyone at the table during the toast, not just the person next to you. Miss someone, and you've committed a social faux pas that will be remembered and discussed for years. It's like a trust exercise meets a staring contest, and you better have good peripheral vision. In Germany, you're supposed to set your glass down on the table and make eye contact again after drinking. It's a double verification system, a belts and suspenders approach to toast etiquette. The Germans have taken medieval poison paranoia and added extra steps just to be thorough. In some cultures, you're not supposed to toast with water because it's considered bad luck, possibly because water can't be poisoned as easily as alcohol. So toasting with water signals that you don't trust anyone enough to risk actual drinks, or because medieval people thought water was boring and insulting as a toast beverage. Either way, water toasts are out. And there are rules about what you can and cannot say during a toast. You're supposed to keep it positive, uplifting, maybe a little bit funny. Long, rambling toasts that lose the thread and end awkwardly are social disasters. Short, forgettable toasts suggest you don't care enough. The perfect toast is exactly the right length, says something meaningful but not too sentimental, gets a laugh but not at anyone's expense, and ends with everyone knowing exactly when to drink. It's performance art with alcohol, and everyone's judging your execution. The clinking itself has become ritualized to the point of absurdity. At large gatherings, people will reach across tables, stand up, extend their arms to ludicrous lengths, all to make sure they clink glasses with everyone in reach. It's like a complicated game of social twister, where the goal is to touch your glass to as many other glasses as possible before the moment passes and everyone drinks. And if you're holding a plastic cup or a beer can, you still clink. It doesn't make the same satisfying chime as crystal glasses, But you do it anyway because the sound doesn't matter, the gesture matters. You're performing a ritual that says, we're in this together, we trust each other, nobody's poisoning anybody, let's get drunk as a group. Some fancy restaurants and bars have leaned into the tradition, serving drinks in glasses specifically designed to create the perfect clinking sound. They'll give you heavy crystal that rings like a bell when tapped, turning your poison prevention ritual into an auditory experience. You're paying extra for the privilege of making a prettier sound while performing medieval trust theatre, and the phrases we use during toasts have their own weird histories. Cheers comes from the old French word chiere, meaning face, which evolved to mean good mood or disposition. So when you say cheers, you're essentially saying good face, which is a weird thing to shout before drinking. Salud is Spanish for health, which makes sense. Prost is German for profit or benefit, because apparently Germans wanted to make sure everyone knew drinking was a calculated decision. Skål is Scandinavian and refers to a bowl or skull, because Vikings allegedly drank from the skulls of their enemies, which is probably a myth, but a very on-brand myth. Each culture has its own word, but they're all doing the same thing, performing a ritual inherited from people who genuinely feared being poisoned at dinner and needed elaborate social protocols to manage that fear. The really absurd part is that we've kept the ritual but lost all the practical elements. We don't clink hard enough to slosh drinks anymore. We don't share cups. We're not actually verifying anything. We're just going through the motions, making noise, following a script, because not following the script is somehow worse than admitting we're all participating in security theatre from the Middle Ages. And at this point, the toast isn't about poison anymore. It's about belonging. It's about being part of a social moment, acknowledging your connection to the people around you, signalling that you're a person who understands how group drinking works. The toast is a membership ritual, a way of saying, I'm one of you, I follow the rules, I will clink my glass and make eye contact and say the magic words because that's what we do. So tonight, the next time you're at a bar or a dinner party or a wedding, and someone proposes a toast, pay attention to what happens. Watch everyone scramble to grab their glasses. Watch them reach across the table to clink with people they barely know. Watch them make awkward eye contact and mumble cheers and then drink in synchronized obedience. You're watching a medieval poison prevention protocol that's been stripped of all meaning and repurposed as a bonding ritual. You're watching people trust each other's drinks while performing a ritual designed for people who trusted no one. And you'll join in, because not joining in is weird. You'll clink your glass, make eye contact, say cheers, and drink. Because medieval nobles were paranoid about poison, and 700 years later, we're still following their instructions. The poison is long gone, the paranoia remains, and we call it celebration. Your mum probably taught you this one. Yawn in public, and you'd better cover your mouth or you're being rude. But why? What's so offensive about a yawn? Turns out, medieval people believed that when you yawned, demons or evil spirits could fly directly into your open mouth and possess your soul. Yes, really. Medieval Christians thought your mouth was a doorway, and yawning was essentially leaving that doorway wide open with a welcome mat for demons. Your soul lived inside your body, loosely contained, and any opening, especially an involuntary one like a yawn, created an opportunity for evil forces to slip in. It was spiritual home invasion, and your hand over your mouth was the deadbolt. This wasn't just casual superstition. Church authorities took it seriously. They taught that yawning in church was especially dangerous because that's where demons like to hang out, waiting for someone to drop their spiritual guard. The devil and his minions were apparently very opportunistic, always looking for an easy possession, and a bored parishioner yawning during a long sermon was low-hanging fruit. The solution was simple. Cover your mouth when you yawn, preferably while making the sign of the cross. This created a physical and spiritual barrier that demons couldn't penetrate. Your hand blocked the entrance, and the blessing reinforced your defences. It was a two-factor authentication system for your soul. Some medieval scholars added another layer to the fear. They believed that yawning not only let demons in, but also let your soul try to escape, just like sneezing. A yawn was your soul getting bored and attempting to leave your body for more interesting surroundings. Covering your mouth kept everything where it belonged. Demons out, soul in, everyone safe until the sermon ended. And it wasn't just about demons. There was also the concern about bad air, miasma, the invisible poisonous vapours that medieval people blamed for disease. They thought illness spread through foul-smelling air, and yawning meant you were inhaling huge amounts of potentially contaminated atmosphere. Covering your mouth while yawning was seen as a health measure, preventing plague air from rushing directly into your lungs. Of course, they had this exactly backward. Covering your mouth when you cough or sneeze actually does prevent disease spread, because you're blocking the respiratory droplets you're expelling. But yawning, you're inhaling, not exhaling. Covering your mouth while yawning does nothing for hygiene. But medieval people didn't understand germ theory, so they covered all the openings just to be safe. Fast forward to today, and we're still covering our mouths when we yawn. Not because we believe in demon possession or miasma, but because we've been told it's polite, it's proper, it's what civilized people do. The reasons have been lost, but the gesture remains, passed down through generations like a game of telephone where the original message was, demons will possess you, and the current message is, just don't be rude. And it is considered rude. Yawn with your mouth wide open in a meeting or on a date or during someone's presentation, and people will judge you. They'll think you're bored, disrespectful, or poorly raised. Never mind that yawning is involuntary, a physiological response to tiredness, or low oxygen levels, or just existing in a stuffy room. You're expected to suppress it or at least hide it, because displaying your yawn is somehow offensive. The social pressure around yawning is intense. People apologise for yawning. Excuse me, sorry, I'm just tired. As if yawning is something you've done to someone else, something that requires an apology. We've turned a basic biological function into a social transgression that demands immediate acknowledgement and regret. And yawning is contagious, which medieval people probably would have interpreted as evidence of demonic activity. You see someone yawn, and suddenly you're yawning too against your will, like some kind of possession chain reaction. Scientists now know it's related to empathy and mirror neurons, but medieval people would have seen it as proof that demons were spreading through the room, leaping from mouth to mouth. There are also elaborate strategies for hiding yawns, the subtle mouth cover, where you pretend to rest your chin on your hand, the fake cough, where you turn a yawn into a cough mid-execution, the jaw clench, where you fight the yawn entirely, keeping your mouth closed while your jaw tries to dislocate itself. We've developed an entire arsenal of yawn suppression techniques to avoid the social embarrassment of admitting we're tired. And if you can't suppress the yawn, you're supposed to make it as small and quiet as possible. No sound, no stretching, definitely no showing your tonsils to the room. A proper civilized yawn should be nearly invisible, a tiny intake of breath that barely registers. Which defeats the entire purpose of yawning, which is to get more oxygen to your brain, but we'd rather suffocate slightly than break medieval etiquette rules. Some cultures have different relationships with yawning. In some parts of the world, yawning openly is perfectly acceptable, even expected. Nobody covers their mouths, nobody apologises. Yawning is just something bodies do, like blinking or breathing, and making a big production out of hiding it would be weird. But in Western cultures, we've kept the medieval standard. Yawns must be hidden, suppressed, apologised for, or at minimum covered with a hand that does absolutely nothing to prevent anything except giving medieval demons one more reason to be frustrated. The hand-over-mouth gesture itself has become so automatic that people do it even when they're alone. You're sitting in your living room, nobody around, you yawn, and your hand flies up to cover your mouth out of pure habit. You're protecting yourself from demons that don't exist in a room with no witnesses. The ritual has become so ingrained it doesn't require an audience, and children are taught this early. Parents see their kid yawn with their mouth open and immediately correct them. Cover your mouth, use your hand, as if the child has committed a grave social error that will haunt them forever if not immediately corrected. The kid has no idea why they're covering their mouth, just that they must, or they'll disappoint the adults. Teachers reinforce it. Grandparents reinforce it. Strangers at restaurants will give you pointed looks if you yawn openly. We've turned demon possession prevention into a universal marker of good breeding, and anyone who doesn't comply is uncivilized, probably raised by wolves, definitely suspect. There's also the question of what you're supposed to do if you can't reach your mouth in time. The yawn happens too fast, your hands are full, you're mid-sentence and suddenly ambushed by your own physiology. Do you yawn openly and face the judgment? Do you try to catch the yawn mid-execution with a weird jaw movement that makes you look like you're having a stroke? There's no good option, only varying degrees of social failure. And let's talk about the people who make noise when they yawn. The loud, extended theatrical yawners who treat it like a full-body experience, complete with sound effects and stretching. These people are monsters to modern society, but they would have been absolutely terrifying to medieval Christians. A loud yawn wasn't just rude, it was an invitation, a siren call to every demon within earshot. Come on in, the door's wide open, bring friends. The really wild thing is that covering your mouth when you yawn serves no practical purpose whatsoever. It doesn't prevent disease transmission because you're not exhaling anything contagious. It doesn't make you less tired. It doesn't stop other people from yawning contagiously because they can still see you yawning, even if your hand is over your mouth. The gesture is purely performative, a signal that says, I acknowledge that yawning is somehow socially problematic, and I'm taking steps to minimize the offense. We're all performing security theatre against medieval demons that we don't believe in, using a gesture that accomplishes nothing, to satisfy a social expectation that nobody can explain. And if you point this out, if you say maybe we don't need to cover our mouths when we yawn because demon possession isn't real and we're all just tired, people will look at you like you've suggested eating dinner with your feet. The logic doesn't matter. The original reason doesn't matter. What matters is that this is the rule, this is what civilized people do, and questioning it makes you the weird one. So we keep covering our mouths. We keep apologizing for yawning. We keep teaching our children to hide their biology behind their hands. We keep participating in a ritual designed to prevent demonic possession, reimagined as politeness, enforced by social pressure, and completely divorced from any rational purpose. Your mouth is not a doorway for demons. Your soul is not trying to escape. The only thing happening when you yawn is your body trying to get more oxygen, and covering your mouth doesn't help with that either. But you'll do it anyway. Because your mum taught you to. Because everyone else does it. Because not doing it feels wrong even though you can't articulate why. The demons aren't real. The possession isn't real. But the fear of breaking the rule, that's real. And that fear is enough to keep us all covering our mouths generation after generation, protecting ourselves from threats that never existed in the first place. Medieval paranoia, now available in a convenient hand gesture. Practice it daily. Teach it to your children. Never question it. The demons thank you for your continued vigilance. If you've ever spent a Saturday morning mowing, edging, weeding, and watering a patch of grass that serves absolutely no practical purpose, congratulations, you're living out a medieval flex. Lawns, as we know them today, are a direct descendant of medieval European estates where only the wealthy could afford to maintain vast stretches of useless, perfectly trimmed grass. Think about what a lawn actually is. It's land that you own, land that could be growing food or sheltering animals or serving literally any practical purpose, and instead you've covered it with a single species of grass that you then spend enormous amounts of time, money and resources keeping alive and exactly the right height. It's agricultural performance art designed to prove you don't need to be practical. In medieval times, only the ultra-wealthy had lawns. Lords and nobles would maintain huge expanses of closely cropped grass around their castles and manor houses, not because grass was useful, but precisely because it wasn't. A perfect lawn said, I have so much land and so many resources that I can waste both on a totally impractical decorative feature. I can pay people to cut this grass with scythes by hand. I don't need this land for crops or livestock. I'm that rich. The lawn was a status symbol, a flex, a middle finger to peasants who were struggling to grow enough turnips to survive the winter. Look at all this land I'm not using, the lawn announced. Look how perfectly maintained it is. Look how I'm literally too wealthy to care about utility. And how did medieval people maintain these lawns before lawnmowers? By grazing animals on them, usually sheep or cattle, who would trim the grass naturally while fertilizing it with their droppings. So maintaining a lawn required owning livestock, which required money, land, and staff to manage the animals. It was expensive, labor-intensive, and served zero functional purpose beyond aesthetics and status. Some nobles took it even further, creating elaborate grass terraces and bowling greens, perfectly flat expanses of grass maintained for games and leisure. These required even more work, more resources, more constant attention. They were like medieval golf courses, monuments to wealth and free time. Fast forward a few centuries, and the English aristocracy perfected the ornamental lawn. By the 1700s, English estates featured massive manicured lawns that stretched for acres, maintained by teams of gardeners who did nothing but tend grass. These lawns were featured in paintings, celebrated in literature, and became synonymous with elegance, refinement, and class. Then something terrible happened. The middle class decided they wanted lawns too. The invention of the lawnmower in the 1830s made it possible for regular people to maintain grass without employing a small army of gardeners or a herd of sheep. Suddenly, the status symbol of the ultra-wealthy became accessible to anyone with a small plot of land and a mechanical grass-cutting device. And America, because America always takes things to their logical extreme, went absolutely lawn crazy. Suburban development in the 20th century made the front lawn a mandatory feature of home ownership. Every house got a lawn. Every lawn had to be perfect. Green, uniform, weed-free, exactly the right height. The American dream included grass maintenance. Homeowners associations formed specifically to enforce lawn standards, creating rules about grass height, acceptable species, watering schedules, and the complete prohibition of anything interesting or useful. You couldn't grow vegetables in your front yard. You couldn't let wildflowers bloom. You couldn't replace your lawn with native plants that actually belonged in your ecosystem. No, you had to maintain a monoculture of non-native grass species that required constant watering, mowing, fertilizing, and chemical treatments to survive. We turned a medieval status symbol into a suburban requirement, and then we made it illegal to opt out. And the obsession is real. People spend billions of dollars annually on lawn care. Fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, sprinkler systems, riding mowers, edgers, aerators, dethatchers, and an entire arsenal of equipment designed to maintain grass. Americans use more water on lawns than on any other agricultural activity. We're irrigating decorative grass more than we're irrigating actual food crops. And for what? So your grass can be slightly greener than your neighbour's. So you can demonstrate to the neighbourhood that you're a responsible homeowner who understands the importance of grass height compliance. So you can spend your weekends performing manual labour on a plant that serves no purpose other than meeting arbitrary aesthetic standards set by people who died before the Industrial Revolution. The perfect lawn has become a moral issue. People with brown lawns are judged. People with weeds are failures. People who let their grass grow tall are neighbourhood villains, possibly criminals, definitely suspects. We've turned grass maintenance into a referendum on your character, your work ethic, your value as a community member. And it's not just social pressure. In many municipalities, you can be fined for not maintaining your lawn. Too tall, and you get a citation. Too brown, and you're violating community standards. Too weird, with native plants or vegetable gardens or anything that isn't uniform grass, and you're in violation of ordinances written specifically to enforce medieval aesthetic preferences. We've taken a status symbol invented by people who owned serfs and turned it into legally mandated suburban conformity. The environmental impact is staggering. Lawns are ecological dead zones. They support virtually no biodiversity. Native insects don't eat them. Native animals can't live in them. They're chemical-dependent monocultures that require constant human intervention to survive. They consume vast amounts of fresh water, often in drought-prone areas where water is scarce. They generate pollution from mowers, blowers, and other gas-powered equipment. They're fertilized with chemicals that run off into waterways and cause algae blooms. Lawns are environmental disasters that we've collectively agreed to maintain because medieval nobles thought grass looked fancy. And the maintenance itself is absurd. You water the grass to make it grow, then you cut it because it grew, then you water it again so it'll grow back, then you cut it again. It's a perpetual cycle of encouraging growth and then punishing the grass for growing. You're Sisyphus, but instead of pushing a boulder up a hill, you're locked in eternal combat with photosynthesis. Some people outsource the work, hiring lawn care companies to handle the maintenance. These companies show up weekly with crews, industrial equipment and chemical treatments, transforming your yard into a suburban factory farm. You're paying someone else to maintain your medieval status symbol while you're at work, probably earning the money you need to pay the lawn care company. It's a perfect economic circle of uselessness, and lawns have replaced actually useful landscaping. Front yards used to have vegetable gardens, fruit trees, herb gardens, things that fed families and served practical purposes. But somewhere along the line, we decided that food growing in your front yard was lower class, embarrassing, something to hide in the backyard if you did it at all. Ornamental grass became more socially acceptable than practical agriculture. We've prioritised appearance over function, medieval aesthetics over survival, community conformity over personal choice, and we've convinced ourselves this is normal, that spending hours every week maintaining useless grass is just part of being an adult, part of home ownership, part of the social contract. Some people are rebelling. They're replacing lawns with native plants, wildflower meadows, vegetable gardens, xeriscaping, anything more useful or ecologically sound than grass monoculture. They're being sued by homeowners associations, cited by municipalities, and shamed by neighbours who think their creative landscaping is bringing down property values. Because nothing says property value like forcing everyone to maintain the same expensive, water-hungry, environmentally destructive grass that medieval nobles invented to flex on peasants. The really maddening part is that most people don't even enjoy their lawns. They don't use them. They don't sit on them. They don't play on them. The lawn exists to be looked at from a distance and to demonstrate compliance with aesthetic norms. It's a front yard you maintain for other people's approval, an expensive stage set for a play nobody's watching. You're not maintaining a lawn because you love grass. You're maintaining it because medieval Europeans decided that wasting land on perfectly trimmed grass was the ultimate power move, and we've never collectively questioned whether maybe, just maybe, we could use that land for something useful. Your lawn doesn't feed you. It doesn't shelter you. It doesn't provide habitat for wildlife or improve your local ecosystem. It just sits there, demanding water, chemicals and weekend labour, turning you into an unpaid groundskeeper for a decorative feature invented by people who owned castles and serfs. So tonight, the next time you look at your lawn, really look at it and ask yourself why you're maintaining it. Is it because you love it? Or is it because you're afraid of what the neighbours will say if you don't? Is it because it brings you joy? Or because you're following a script written by medieval nobles who never mowed their own grass? You're performing maintenance on a status symbol that lost its meaning 500 years ago. You're spending your finite time on Earth fighting an unwinnable war against biology. You're doing exactly what medieval serfs did, minus the serf part, which is arguably worse because at least they were being paid. Your lawn is a medieval flex you inherited and can't escape. Welcome to home ownership. Your grass needs cutting. Ever wondered why brides insist on dressing their friends in identical, often unflattering dresses? It's not just about aesthetic coordination or making sure nobody outshines the bride. It's medieval paranoia. Back in the day, people genuinely believed that evil spirits and jealous demons attended weddings to curse the bride. Yes, really. Medieval people thought weddings were demon magnets. All that happiness, love and fertility in one place was apparently irresistible to evil spirits who wanted nothing more than to ruin everyone's day. The demons would show up uninvited, scout the crowd for the bride, and then curse her with infertility, bad luck, or spontaneous possession. Just standard wedding crasher behaviour, medieval style. The solution was brilliant in its paranoid logic. If demons couldn't identify which woman was actually the bride, they couldn't curse her. So brides surrounded themselves with decoys, other women dressed identically to confuse any supernatural entities in attendance. It was spiritual camouflage, a shell game with humans, and the demons were supposedly too stupid to figure out which one was getting married. Bridesmaids weren't there to hold the bouquet or fix the veil or pose for photos. They were there to serve as demon bait, sacrificial lookalikes who would draw curses away from the actual bride. It was the ultimate friendship test. Hey, will you dress exactly like me and potentially get possessed by a demon at my wedding? True friends said yes. And it wasn't just the bridesmaids. In some medieval traditions, the bride and all her attendants wore veils, making it even harder to distinguish who was who. The entire bridal party became an indistinguishable cluster of veiled women, a confusing parade designed to overwhelm demonic target acquisition systems. The demons would show up, see a dozen identical women, and presumably give up in frustration and go haunt a different wedding. Groomsmen served the same function. They dressed like the groom, surrounded him, and acted as decoys against evil spirits, jealous rivals, or the bride's angry ex-boyfriends who might show up to cause trouble. Medieval weddings were basically security operations disguised as celebrations, with everyone playing a role in protecting the happy couple from supernatural and human threats. The tradition stuck around long after people stopped believing in wedding demons. By the Victorian era, bridesmaids were still dressing identically, but the reason had shifted from demon confusion to aesthetic unity and class signalling. A bride who could afford to dress multiple women in matching expensive gowns was demonstrating wealth and social status. The bridesmaids became props in a display of the bride's resources and taste, and that's where we are today. Bridesmaids still wear matching dresses, but now it's framed as tradition, as aesthetic choice, as creating a cohesive visual for the wedding photos. Nobody mentions demons anymore. Nobody talks about spiritual protection. It's just what you do when you get married, and questioning it makes you the weird one. But let's talk about those dresses. Bridesmaid dresses have a reputation for being uniformly terrible, and there's a reason for that. The bride picks a dress that flatters her vision for the wedding, not necessarily the bodies, preferences, or budgets of her bridesmaids. The result is often a dress that looks good in theory, okay on one person, and actively bad on everyone else. Strapless gowns for people who hate strapless. Poofy skirts on people with athletic builds. Colours that clash with certain skin tones. Fabrics that wrinkle if you breathe wrong. Styles that went out of fashion 3 years ago and will never come back. Bridesmaid dresses are where fashion goes to commit crimes against friendship, and the bridesmaids are expected to pay for these dresses themselves, which adds financial insult to aesthetic injury. You're paying $200 to $400 for a dress you'll never wear again, that doesn't fit properly, that you didn't choose, that exists solely to fulfill someone else's wedding vision. It's like being charged admission to be a human decoration. Some brides are self-aware about this. They'll apologise in advance, promise the dress is re-wearable, it's not, or offer to let bridesmaids choose their own styles within a colour palette. But many brides embrace the matching dress tradition with authoritarian zeal, treating their bridesmaids like a coordinated dance troupe that must conform to exact specifications or risk ruining the wedding aesthetic. And bridesmaids mostly go along with it because that's what friendship demands. You swallow your opinions about the seafoam green satin monstrosity, smile for the photos, and silently plan which charity shop will receive the dress immediately after the reception. It's a ritual of sacrifice, just like medieval times, except instead of attracting demon curses, you're just attracting pitying looks from wedding guests. The matching dress requirement also creates a weird power dynamic. The bride becomes a temporary dictator whose aesthetic preferences override everyone else's comfort, budget, and personal style. You might be asked to dye your hair, remove a piercing, cover a tattoo, or wear uncomfortable shoes that match the dress. The bride's vision becomes law, and dissent is labelled selfish or unsupportive. Some brides take it further. They'll dictate jewellery, hairstyles, makeup looks, nail polish colours, even undergarments. Because visible bra straps apparently ruin wedding photos more than uncomfortable friends ruin wedding memories. The bridesmaids become mannequins, styled and posed according to someone else's Pinterest board, their individuality temporarily suspended in service of matching aesthetics. And it's not just the day of the wedding. There are usually pre-wedding events where bridesmaids are expected to coordinate again. Matching shirts for the bachelorette party, themed outfits for the bridal shower, identical robes for getting ready photos. The matching extends across multiple events, multiple purchases, multiple opportunities to demonstrate that yes, you're all still willing to dress identically despite the financial and aesthetic cost. The photo aspect has intensified the tradition. Instagram and Pinterest have created impossible standards for wedding aesthetics, and bridesmaids are expected to contribute to that visual perfection. The dresses aren't just about looking coordinated in person. They're about creating a cohesive colour palette that photographs well, that gets likes, that demonstrates the bride's impeccable taste and planning skills. Bridesmaids have become background characters in someone else's carefully curated social media content, and the matching dresses are their costumes. Some modern brides are rebelling against the tradition. They're letting bridesmaids choose their own dresses, wear different styles, or even skip dresses entirely in favour of separates or jumpsuits. These brides are praised as progressive, considerate, cool, when really they're just acknowledging that forcing your friends into identical unflattering dresses is weird and maybe we should stop. But they're the exception. Most weddings still feature matching bridesmaids, because the tradition is so entrenched that deviating from it feels wrong, feels chaotic, feels like you're not taking the wedding seriously enough. The matching dresses signal to guests that this is a real wedding, a proper wedding, a wedding that respects tradition even if nobody remembers why the tradition exists. And let's not forget the aftermath. After the wedding, bridesmaids are stuck with these dresses. You can't donate them because who wants someone else's bridesmaid dress? You can't wear them to other events because everyone will know it's a bridesmaid dress. You can't alter them enough to make them wearable because the style is fundamentally unflattering. So they hang in closets, taking up space, serving as expensive reminders of that time you dressed identically to 5 other women to confuse demons that nobody believes in anymore. Some people collect them, amassing a rainbow of unwearable dresses that represent different friends' weddings and questionable taste. It's a closet of sacrifice, a monument to friendship tested by matching fabric. The really ironic part is that in photos you can always tell who the bride is anyway. She's the one in white. She's the one with the bigger dress, the fancier hair, the bouquet, the attention. The matching bridesmaids don't actually create confusion. They create a coordinated backdrop that makes the bride stand out more by contrast. Which means the demon confusion strategy was always flawed. The demons would have figured it out immediately. But we've kept the tradition anyway, stripped of its original purpose, retained purely because weddings are supposed to look a certain way, and bridesmaids in matching dresses are part of that look. So tonight, if you've ever been a bridesmaid, take a moment to appreciate what you did. You spent hundreds of dollars on a dress you hated. You stood for hours in uncomfortable shoes. You smiled through photos while Spanx cut off your circulation, all to fulfill a tradition designed to confuse medieval demons. You were demon bait in seafoam green. You were a decoy in lavender satin. You were spiritual camouflage in an empire waist gown with a bow that added 15 pounds. The demons didn't show up, but you showed up. You matched. You conformed. You sacrificed your comfort, your budget, and your personal style for someone else's vision of wedding perfection. And that dress is still in your closet, reminding you daily that friendship costs $300 and comes in colours nobody would choose voluntarily. Medieval demons would be proud. Wearing black to a funeral feels automatic, respectful, sombre. But it's not a universal human instinct. It's a medieval European custom rooted in superstition and social signalling. In the Middle Ages, mourners wore black to funerals because they believed it made them invisible to the spirits of the dead, who might otherwise follow them home. That's right. Medieval people thought ghosts had terrible vision and could only see bright colours. Wear black to a funeral, and you'd blend into the shadows, becoming undetectable to the recently deceased spirit who might be confused, angry, or just clingy and looking for someone to haunt. It was spiritual camouflage, a way of attending a funeral without attracting supernatural attention. The logic was actually more complex than just ghost blindness. Medieval Christians believed that the newly dead went through a transition period where their souls lingered near their bodies before moving on to the afterlife. During this time, the spirits were disoriented, possibly frightened, maybe resentful about being dead, and they could see the living, which created all sorts of problems. If a ghost recognized you at the funeral, they might try to communicate, ask for help, or worse, attach themselves to you and follow you home. This was especially concerning if you'd had any unresolved issues with the deceased. Owed them money? Better wear black. Had an argument right before they died. Black everything. Secretly glad they're gone. Black from head to toe because guilty ghosts apparently have excellent vengeful instincts. Black clothing also served another purpose. It disguised your identity from jealous or malicious spirits who might attend funerals looking for new victims. Death, according to medieval belief, attracted death. Grim Reapers, demons, and various other supernatural entities would show up to funerals like it was a networking event, and they'd be scouting for their next target. Wearing black made you less noticeable, less interesting, less alive-looking. It was the medieval version of business casual for avoiding supernatural recruitment. The wealthy took this very seriously. They commissioned special mourning clothes, entire black wardrobes that signalled both respect for the dead and protection from the dead. These weren't just black garments. They were elaborate costumes featuring black veils, black gloves, black jewellery, sometimes even black-dyed handkerchiefs specifically for funeral use. The richer you were, the more comprehensive your ghost avoidance wardrobe, and mourning periods were long. In medieval and Victorian times, you didn't just wear black for the funeral. You wore black for months, sometimes years, depending on your relationship to the deceased. Widows wore black for at least a year, often longer. Close family members wore black for 6 months to a year. Even distant relatives and acquaintances were expected to wear black for several weeks. This created a visual hierarchy of grief. The more black you wore and the longer you wore it, the more devoted you appeared. It was performative mourning, a way of signalling to the community that you were properly devastated, appropriately respectful, and definitely not glad they died even if they were a terrible person. But it was also expensive. Black fabric was costly, especially if you wanted deep, true black rather than greyish or brownish black. It required special dyes, careful treatment, and frequent replacement because black faded quickly. Maintaining a proper mourning wardrobe was a financial burden, which meant that once again, medieval customs favoured the wealthy and punished everyone else. Poorer people did their best. They'd dye existing clothes black, wear their darkest garments, or borrow mourning clothes from neighbours. But they couldn't always afford to follow the rules perfectly, which meant they were judged not just for their grief, but for their inability to properly costume it. Not wearing black to a funeral suggested you were either disrespectful or poor, both of which were socially damaging. Fast forward to today, and we're still wearing black to funerals. Not because we believe in ghost vision problems or supernatural stalking, but because it's tradition, because it's respectful, because showing up to a funeral in bright colours is considered offensive. We've stripped away the superstition and kept the dress code, turning ghost camouflage into a mandatory fashion statement. And people take it seriously. Wear the wrong colour to a funeral, and you'll be judged, gossiped about, possibly confronted. Stories circulate about people who showed up to funerals in red or white or, heaven forbid, patterns, and the social consequences were severe. You disrespected the dead, offended the family, proved you don't understand basic social norms. Never mind that the dead person can't see what you're wearing. Never mind that other cultures wear white to funerals or bright colours or whatever they want. Never mind that the entire custom is based on medieval people thinking ghosts had selective colour blindness. In Western culture, you wear black, or you're the villain. The funeral industry has fully embraced this. Funeral homes are decorated in sombre blacks and greys. Staff wear black suits. Even the hearses are black because apparently dead people need to travel in vehicles that match the aesthetic. We've created an entire colour-coded mourning infrastructure based on a tradition designed to hide from ghosts. And it's not just clothing. The entire funeral becomes a black-themed event. Black flowers, black ribbons, black guest books, black everything. We've taken ghost camouflage and turned it into interior design. If medieval people could see modern funerals, they'd probably think we were taking the spirit hiding thing way too seriously. Some people are rebelling. They're requesting celebrations of life instead of traditional funerals, asking mourners to wear bright colours, even specifying in their wills that nobody should wear black. These requests are often seen as quirky, eccentric, or attention-seeking, when really they're just acknowledging that maybe we don't need to dress like we're hiding from the person we're supposedly honouring. But even with explicit instructions, people struggle. They'll show up in black anyway, or dark grey, or navy blue, because wearing actual bright colours to a funeral feels wrong on a visceral level. We've internalised the rules so deeply that breaking it, even when asked to break it, creates discomfort. The black mourning costume has also extended into modern grief culture. After the funeral, people continue wearing black, or dark colours, as a signal to others that they're grieving. It's a visual, handle with care sign, a way of communicating emotional state without words, which is useful perhaps, but it's still rooted in the medieval idea that grief requires a specific uniform. Social media has complicated this. People post funeral photos and the images are scrutinised. Did everyone wear black? Was the deceased daughter wearing an appropriate shade? Did someone show up in a navy blazer instead of true black? The judgment has moved online, where dress code violations become permanent digital records of disrespect. And there's the question of what counts as black enough. Is charcoal acceptable? Dark grey? Navy? Where's the line between respectfully sombre and insufficiently black? These questions create anxiety, turning funeral attendance into a fashion minefield, where one wrong shade could mark you as disrespectful forever. Different generations have different standards. Older mourners often wear full black traditional mourning attire that would satisfy medieval ghost avoidance protocols. Younger mourners might wear black jeans and a black shirt, technically compliant but less formal. This generational gap creates tension, with older family members judging younger ones for not taking mourning seriously enough, not understanding that the seriousness was always about hiding from ghosts. Some cultures within Western society have maintained even stricter mourning rules. Orthodox Jewish tradition includes covering mirrors, sitting shiva, wearing torn ribbons, and specific mourning periods that make Victorian customs look casual. Greek Orthodox tradition includes wearing black for extended periods, sometimes years. Italian families have historically worn black for significant mourning periods, with widows sometimes wearing black for the rest of their lives. These extended mourning periods served a social function beyond ghost protection. They signalled to the community that you were grieving, and shouldn't be expected to participate fully in social activities, celebrations, or matchmaking. The black clothes were a do not disturb sign, a boundary enforced through fashion, but they also created pressure. Widows who stopped wearing black too soon were accused of not loving their husbands enough, of being improper, possibly having affairs. The mourning costume became a prison, a mandatory performance of grief that lasted long after the actual emotional devastation had subsided. You couldn't just grieve and move on. You had to look like you were grieving for months or years, whether or not that matched your internal experience. Modern Western culture has shortened the expected mourning period significantly, but the funeral itself still requires black. It's a compressed version of medieval mourning customs, one day of mandatory ghost camouflage instead of months or years. We've streamlined the superstition, made it more convenient but kept it mandatory. The really absurd part is that in many non-Western cultures, white is the colour of mourning, or red, or bright colours that celebrate the deceased's life rather than hiding from their ghost. These cultures have their own traditions, their own logic, their own relationships with death and mourning, and they work just fine. The ghosts don't seem to care what colour anyone wears, but suggest wearing white to a Western funeral and watch the horror on people's faces. You might as well announce you're glad they died. The black dress code is so ingrained, so fundamental to our concept of respectful mourning, that any deviation feels like sacrilege. So tonight, if you've ever stressed about what to wear to a funeral, if you've ever bought black clothes specifically for mourning, if you've ever judged someone for wearing the wrong colour, remember what you're really doing. You're following a dress code designed to make you invisible to confused medieval ghosts with bad eyesight. The ghosts aren't watching. They never were. But you'll wear black anyway, because 700 years ago, someone decided that's how you hide from the dead, and we've been hiding ever since. This one's particularly American, but it's rooted in class-conscious medieval thinking that travelled across the ocean and evolved. The idea that you can't wear white after Labor Day comes from early 20th century American high society trying to distinguish themselves from the nouveau riche. But the obsession with seasonal clothing rules goes all the way back to medieval sumptuary laws. Medieval sumptuary laws were regulations that dictated who could wear what based on social class. These weren't suggestions. They were actual laws, enforced with fines and sometimes imprisonment. Peasants couldn't wear silk or velvet. Merchants couldn't wear certain colours or furs. Only nobility could wear purple, ermine or gold thread. The laws existed to make sure everyone stayed in their designated social lane, visually branded by their clothing so nobody forgot where they belonged. The logic was simple. If peasants could afford to dress like nobles, the entire social hierarchy would collapse into chaos. How would you know who to bow to? How would you know whose boots to lick? The clothing had to be regulated to maintain order, to keep the classes visibly separated, to ensure that wealth and status remained immediately obvious from across a crowded medieval street. These laws were incredibly specific. In 14th century England, only people with income above a certain level could wear fur. In France, commoners couldn't wear gold buttons. In Italy, the length of your sleeves and the style of your shoes were regulated by law. Violate these rules, and you'd be fined, publicly shamed, or in extreme cases, arrested for dressing above your station. The obsession with clothing rules wasn't just about maintaining hierarchy, it was about controlling social mobility. If you made money as a merchant or craftsman, you might be tempted to dress better, to signal your new wealth, to climb the social ladder. Sumptuary laws prevented that. You could get rich, but you couldn't look rich, which meant everyone still knew you were fundamentally inferior to people born into nobility. This medieval mindset that your clothing should announce your social class and that dressing wrong is a moral and legal violation survived long after the actual laws were repealed. It evolved into unwritten social rules, enforced not by courts, but by judgment, gossip, and social exclusion. And that's where the white after Labor Day rule comes in. By the late 1800s, American high society, the old money families who'd been wealthy for generations, faced a problem. New money was everywhere. Industrial tycoons, railroad barons, oil magnates, people who'd made fortunes in business were now rich enough to dress well, vacation in the same places, and generally act like they belonged in high society. This was unacceptable. So the old money families created new rules, subtle social codes that would distinguish them from the nouveau riche. One of these rules was about seasonal clothing. White, light colours, linen and seersucker were for summer, specifically the period between Memorial Day and Labor Day, when wealthy families retreated to their summer homes, beach resorts and country estates. After Labor Day, you returned to the city, put away the summer whites, and switched to darker, heavier fabrics appropriate for fall and winter. This wasn't about practicality or weather. It was about demonstrating that you knew the rules, that you'd been raised in high society, that you belonged. New money might buy expensive white clothing, but they wouldn't know not to wear it after Labor Day. That mistake would immediately mark them as outsiders, wannabes, people with money but no breeding. It was a trap, basically. A social test disguised as a fashion guideline, and it worked. Fashion magazines, etiquette guides, and society columnists spread the rule, turning it into common knowledge among anyone who aspired to be fashionable. Wear white after Labor Day, and you'd be marked as ignorant, tasteless, or worse, middle class trying to act upper class. The rule became so entrenched that by the mid-20th century, even people who weren't wealthy, who would never vacation at summer estates, who had no connection to high society whatsoever, followed it religiously. Department stores stopped selling white clothes after Labor Day. Women's magazines declared it a cardinal sin. Wearing white after Labor Day became one of those unbreakable fashion rules, up there with not wearing socks with sandals or matching your belt to your shoes. And it was completely arbitrary. The rule only applied to certain types of white. White shirts were fine year-round, if you were a man. White wedding dresses, obviously acceptable. White in warm climates like Florida or California, subject to regional exceptions. The rule had so many loopholes and exceptions that it barely made sense, but that was kind of the point. If you had to ask about the exceptions, you weren't part of the group that invented the rules. Fashion designers and the fashion industry loved the rule because it created artificial demand. If you can't wear summer clothes all year, you need to buy fall clothes, winter clothes, spring clothes, and then summer clothes again. The seasonal clothing cycle keeps people shopping, keeps fashion moving, keeps the industry profitable. What started as class gatekeeping became a marketing strategy. But the rule also created genuine anxiety. Women stressed about accidentally wearing white pants after Labor Day. They'd check the calendar, plan their wardrobes around the arbitrary deadline, feel guilty if they violated it even accidentally. The rule was enforced through judgment, through whispered comments, through the fear of being seen as someone who didn't know better. And men mostly escaped the rule, because of course they did. The white after Labor Day prohibition primarily targeted women's fashion. Men could wear white shirts year-round without comment, but women in white pants or white shoes after Labor Day were committing a fashion felony. It was medieval sumptuary law thinking repackaged as mid-century American fashion advice, with added sexism. By the 21st century, the rule started to crumble. Fashion designers began showing white in fall and winter collections. Celebrities wore white year-round. Fashion magazines declared the rule outdated, irrelevant, dead. But even as the rule officially died, its ghost lingered. People still feel vaguely guilty wearing white after Labor Day. They'll say things like, "I know you're not supposed to, but," or "I'm breaking the rules today," acknowledging the rule even as they violate it. And some people still enforce it. Style purists, etiquette experts, older generations who remember when the rule was absolute. They'll comment on someone's white outfit in October, usually framed as helpful advice. but really serving as a reminder that they know the rules and you violated them. The really frustrating part is that the rule never made practical sense. White clothing isn't inherently summery. Winter white exists as a concept. White keeps you cool in summer, but it's also just a colour, neutral, classic, appropriate for any season if you style it correctly. The prohibition against white after Labour Day was never about the clothing. It was about maintaining social boundaries, about having a secret handshake that only certain people knew. It was medieval class consciousness wearing a summer hat. Some people argue the rule had practical origins. White linen and cotton were summer fabrics, lighter and more breathable, while fall and winter required heavier wools and tweeds in darker colours. But that explanation falls apart quickly, because wealthy people had climate-controlled homes, heated transportation, and no practical reason to avoid white in fall. The rule was always about appearances, about signalling, about knowing your place. And Labour Day itself is an interesting cut-off. It's a movable holiday, the first Monday in September, which means the rule shifts every year. Some years you can wear white until September 7th. Other years it's September 1st. The inconsistency proves it was never about weather or seasons. It was about an arbitrary social deadline that existed purely to test whether you knew the rule. Other countries don't have this rule. Europeans wear white year-round and think Americans are insane for caring about Labour Day fashion restrictions. Asian fashion has no such prohibition. It's a uniquely American neurosis, born from class anxiety and maintained through generations of people who learned the rule without questioning it. Modern fashion has largely moved past it, but the underlying mindset remains. We still have unwritten rules about what to wear when, what's appropriate for which season, which trends are acceptable for which age groups. We've replaced the white after Labour Day rule with dozens of other clothing rules that serve the same function, separating people who know from people who don't, maintaining social hierarchies through fashion, judging people based on their clothing choices. We've kept medieval sumptuary law thinking, just made it more subtle, more pervasive, harder to pin down. Instead of laws dictating who can wear what, we have Instagram influencers, fashion magazines and peer pressure doing the same job. The enforcement mechanism changed, but the goal remained the same: make sure everyone knows their place and make sure they dress accordingly. The white after Labour Day rule might be dying, but the impulse behind it is alive and well. We're still judging people's clothing choices, still using fashion as a social hierarchy tool, still following rules invented by people who wanted to keep outsiders out. So tonight, if you've ever worried about wearing white after Labour Day, if you've ever judged someone else for it, if you've ever felt that little twinge of rule-breaking guilt while wearing white pants in October, remember what you're really doing. You're following a social code invented by wealthy Americans who wanted to distinguish themselves from people with newer money, which itself was a descendant of medieval laws that dictated clothing by social class. The peasants couldn't wear silk. The nouveau riche couldn't wear white after Labour Day. Same energy, different century. And you're still letting it control your wardrobe, because somewhere deep down, we're all still afraid of being the person who doesn't know the rules, doesn't fit in, doesn't belong. Medieval sumptuary laws died centuries ago, but we've kept them alive through fashion anxiety. Welcome to class warfare by clothing. Your white pants are a rebellion, whether you meant them to be or not. We already covered sneezing, but let's talk about why it's especially important to bless children when they sneeze. Medieval parents were utterly terrified of losing their children, and with good reason, child mortality rates were horrifying. A simple sneeze could be the first sign of plague, influenza, or any number of deadly illnesses. In medieval Europe, roughly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Half. That's not a typo or an exaggeration. It was normal to have 6 children and expect 3 of them not to make it to adulthood. Childhood was essentially a gauntlet of diseases, accidents, and malnutrition, and parents lived in constant fear that any symptom, any change, any small sign of illness could be the beginning of the end. A sneeze wasn't just a sneeze when it came to children. It was a potential death sentence. Sneezing could indicate the plague, which killed quickly and horribly. It could be influenza, pneumonia, measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, or any of the dozens of diseases that swept through medieval communities, killing children by the dozen. Parents watched their children obsessively for symptoms, and a sneeze would trigger immediate panic. So when a child sneezed, adults didn't just bless them casually. They blessed them urgently, desperately, with genuine fear behind the words. God bless you wasn't a polite formality. It was a prayer, a plea, a magical incantation designed to protect a fragile life that could be snuffed out at any moment. It was parents begging the universe to let their child survive one more day. The blessing served multiple purposes. First, it was protection against the diseases that sneezing might signal. If you blessed the child quickly enough, before the illness could take hold, God might intervene and spare them. It was preventive spiritual medicine, administered at the first sign of danger. Second, it protected the child's soul. Remember, medieval people believed sneezing could expel the soul or create an opening for demons. Children's souls were considered especially vulnerable, not fully anchored, easier to dislodge or steal. A child's sneeze was a double threat: physical illness and spiritual danger. The blessing addressed both, sealing the soul inside while calling on divine protection against disease. Third, it was a community responsibility. When a child sneezed in public, multiple adults would bless them, sometimes talking over each other in their haste to provide protection. It wasn't just the parents' job, it was everyone's duty to help protect children, because child death affected entire communities. Lose too many children, and your village might not survive. Every child was a communal investment, and blessing them when they sneezed was collective insurance against loss. The fear was so intense that some medieval parents developed elaborate blessing rituals for their children. They wouldn't just say, "God bless you." They'd make the sign of the cross over the child, say a full prayer, sometimes touch the child's forehead or chest while blessing them. For particularly sickly children, parents might keep holy water nearby to sprinkle on them after sneezing, or small religious relics to press against their skin. It was magical thinking born from helplessness. Parents had no medical knowledge, no antibiotics, no real way to prevent or cure the diseases that killed their children. All they had was prayer, superstition, and desperate hope that divine intervention might save their babies where human medicine could not. And children sneezed a lot. They still do. Allergies, dust, colds, the normal respiratory irritants that affect everyone. But in medieval times, every sneeze was scrutinised. Was it just one sneeze or multiple? Was there mucus? Did the child seem lethargic afterward? Parents would interrogate their children after sneezing, checking for additional symptoms, watching for any sign that this sneeze was the deadly kind. The anxiety was passed down through generations. Children grew up learning that sneezing was dangerous, that it required immediate blessing, that unblessed sneezes could lead to death or possession. They internalized the fear, and when they became parents, they blessed their own children with the same urgency their parents had blessed them. This created a cultural cycle of sneeze anxiety that persisted long after medical science understood that sneezing itself wasn't dangerous, that it was just a symptom, and that blessing someone didn't prevent disease. But the behavior remained, because even when people stopped believing in the superstition intellectually, the emotional weight of protecting children was too strong to abandon. Today we still bless children's sneezes with more urgency than adults. Listen to how people react when a child sneezes versus when an adult sneezes. Children get immediate, emphatic blessings, often from multiple people. Adults get a casual bless you or sometimes nothing at all. We've kept the medieval hierarchy of sneeze importance, prioritizing children's sneezes because somewhere in our cultural DNA, we still remember that children were more vulnerable, more precious, more in need of protection. Parents especially feel compelled to bless their children's sneezes. Not blessing your own child's sneeze feels like a failure, like you're not protecting them properly. Even parents who don't bless other people's sneezes will automatically bless their children's, usually without conscious thought. It's a reflex inherited from medieval parents who lived in terror of losing their babies, and children are taught to expect it. A child sneezes, waits for the blessing, and if it doesn't come, they'll sometimes prompt it. "Nobody said bless you," or they'll say it themselves. Blessing their own sneeze because the absence of a blessing creates anxiety even in children who don't understand why. We've turned a medieval survival ritual into a childhood expectation, a marker of care, a way of saying I'm watching over you even when we don't consciously know that's what we're saying. The blessing also became a teaching moment. Parents used it to instruct children in manners, in religious practice, in community values. When someone blesses you, you say thank you. When you sneeze, you wait for the blessing. It became part of socialization, training children in the complex web of medieval social rituals that we've preserved without updating. Some cultures intensified the practice. In parts of Europe, there are specific blessings for children's sneezes that are different and more elaborate than adult blessings. In some traditions, children who sneeze multiple times in succession receive escalating blessings, each one more urgent than the last, as if the repeated sneezing indicates increasing danger. This makes no medical sense whatsoever, but it makes perfect medieval sense. More sneezes meant more opportunities for the soul to escape, more chances for demons to enter, more symptoms of potentially fatal illness. Of course you'd escalate the blessings. The child was in escalating danger. Modern medicine has eliminated most of the diseases that made sneezing so terrifying. Childhood mortality in developed countries is a tiny fraction of what it was in medieval times. Children sneeze all the time and they're fine. The sneeze is rarely a symptom of anything serious. The blessing serves no medical purpose, but we keep doing it. Parents still feel compelled to bless their children's sneezes. Teachers bless their students. Strangers in grocery stores bless other people's children. We've maintained a ritual born from the legitimate terror of watching children die from diseases we couldn't treat, and we perform it in a world where those diseases are mostly conquered. The emotion behind it has shifted. It's no longer desperate fear. It's affection, care, habit, cultural continuity. But the ritual itself is unchanged. The words are the same. The urgency for children versus adults is the same. We're still following the medieval script, still blessing children's sneezes like their lives depend on it, even though we know they don't. And maybe that's okay. Maybe keeping a ritual that expresses care, that says I notice you, I'm protecting you, even symbolically, even unnecessarily, is worth maintaining. But it's worth knowing where it comes from, worth understanding that we're echoing the prayers of medieval parents who blessed their children's sneezes not out of habit but out of genuine terror that this sneeze might be the one that took their baby away. Every time we bless a child's sneeze, we're channeling the fear of parents who lived 700 years ago, who watched half their children die, who had nothing but prayers and blessings to offer against death. We're performing their grief, their love, their desperate hope, transmitted across centuries into a world where children mostly survive their childhoods. The medieval parents would probably be amazed to learn that children in the future sneeze constantly and rarely die from it. But they'd still recognize the blessing, still understand the impulse, still nod in approval that we're watching over our children, even in small ways, even when the danger has passed. So tonight, the next time you hear a child sneeze and automatically say, "God bless you," know that you're not just being polite. You're participating in a centuries-old ritual of parental fear and love, a desperate prayer that became a habit, that became a tradition, that became something we do without thinking. The children are safer now. The diseases are mostly gone. But we're still blessing, still protecting, still following instructions from parents who knew that every sneeze could be the last. Medieval child mortality was a horror. The blessing is what survived. And we keep saying it, keep passing it down, keep blessing our children's sneezes like the fate of the world depends on it, because once upon a time, it did. Let's get uncomfortable for a moment and talk about why, even in the 21st century, there's still this bizarre cultural obsession with virginity, especially female virginity. White wedding dresses, purity rings, fathers giving away daughters, all of it traces back to medieval concepts of women as property, and the obsessive need to ensure legitimate heirs. In medieval times, virginity wasn't about morality or virtue in any spiritual sense. It was about economics and inheritance. Noblemen needed to know that their children were actually their children, because those children would inherit land, titles, and wealth. The only way to be certain of paternity in a world without DNA testing was to ensure that your wife had never had sex with anyone else. Virginity was a quality control measure for the legitimacy of your heirs. Women, in this system, were essentially vessels for producing legitimate children. Their value was directly tied to their virginity before marriage, and their fidelity after. A woman who wasn't a virgin on her wedding night could be producing someone else's child, which would mess up the entire inheritance system. Illegitimate heirs could claim titles and property they didn't deserve. Family bloodlines would be corrupted. The social order itself was at stake. So virginity became obsessively policed. Young noblewomen were kept under constant surveillance, chaperoned everywhere, locked in towers if necessary. They weren't allowed unsupervised contact with men. Their social interactions were monitored, their correspondence was read, their virginity was guarded like the crown jewels, because in a very real sense, it was more valuable than jewels. A virginal bride secured legitimate heirs. A deflowered daughter was damaged goods. The wedding night itself was a verification ritual. In some medieval cultures, the blood-stained bed sheets from the wedding night would be displayed to family members or even the public as proof that the bride had been a virgin. No blood, and the marriage could be annulled. The bride returned to her family in disgrace, her entire future ruined. The inspection of bed sheets was literally quality control for purchased women. Because make no mistake, medieval marriage was a property transaction. The father owned the daughter, controlled her virginity, and sold or traded her to another man through marriage. The bride price or dowry was payment for the transfer of property rights. The daughter had no say in this transaction. She was the goods being traded, and her virginity was the seal that guaranteed she was genuine, unused, acceptable. This is why fathers give away brides at weddings. It's not symbolic, it's literal. The father is transferring ownership of his daughter to the husband, and the virginity guarantee is part of that transaction. The tradition survived because it looks sentimental and sweet when you strip away the property law context, but the origin is clearly transactional. The white wedding dress tradition, which everyone thinks is ancient, is actually relatively modern, popularised by Queen Victoria in 1840. But the association between white and virginity, between white and purity, that goes back much further. White symbolised untouched, unspoiled, clean, virginal. A bride in white was advertising her virgin status to the entire congregation, proving that she was a proper bride worthy of the transaction. Medieval Christianity intensified the virginity obsession by making it a moral and spiritual issue. The Virgin Mary became the ultimate role model for women, which was problematic because she was literally impossible to emulate. She was a virgin who gave birth, the perfect combination of purity and motherhood. Regular women had to choose, and if they chose marriage and motherhood, they were forever spiritually inferior to women who chose virginity and became nuns. This created a bizarre hierarchy, where women's value was measured by their relationship to sex. Virgins were pure and holy. Wives and mothers were spiritually compromised but socially necessary. Women who had sex outside marriage were irredeemable sinners destined for hell. The entire system positioned female sexuality as fundamentally dangerous, something that needed to be controlled, contained, and monitored constantly. And male virginity? Completely different standards. Medieval men were expected to have sexual experience before marriage. It was considered normal, even desirable, for men to sleep with servants, prostitutes, or lower-class women. Their virginity, or lack thereof, had no bearing on their value, their honour, or their ability to inherit. The sexual double standard was absolute and enforced by law, religion, and social custom. This medieval thinking hasn't disappeared. It's evolved, been rebranded, but the underlying logic remains. In many cultures, female virginity is still obsessively policed and valued, while male virginity is treated as something to be lost as quickly as possible. Women are still judged for their sexual history in ways men aren't. The language is still asymmetrical. Men who have lots of sex are players or studs. Women are something far less complimentary. Purity rings, which became popular in American evangelical Christianity in the 1990s, are a direct descendant of medieval virginity obsession. Young girls, sometimes as young as elementary school age, pledge to remain virgins until marriage. They wear rings symbolising this pledge, often given to them by their fathers in creepy ceremonies that explicitly frame the father as the guardian of his daughter's sexuality, until he transfers that guardianship to her future husband. These purity pledges don't work, by the way. Studies show that teenagers who take purity pledges are just as likely to have sex before marriage as teenagers who don't. They're just less likely to use contraception when they do, because planning for sex would mean acknowledging you might break your pledge. The pledges don't prevent sex, they just make sex more dangerous and guilt-ridden. But the pledges aren't really about preventing sex. They're about control, about maintaining traditional gender roles, about preserving the medieval idea that female sexuality belongs to men, first to fathers, then to husbands, never to the women themselves. The obsession with virginity creates real harm. Girls and women are taught that their value is tied to their sexual status, that they can be ruined or damaged by sex, that they owe their virginity to their future husbands. This leads to shame, trauma, dysfunctional relationships with their own bodies, and the persistent belief that women who have had sex are somehow less worthy than women who haven't. The medical establishment has contributed to this harm. The concept of the hymen as a seal that breaks during first intercourse proving virginity is mostly myth. Hymens vary widely, can be stretched or torn through non-sexual activities, and don't reliably indicate anything about sexual history. But doctors still perform virginity tests in some countries, examining hymens to determine if women have had sex, even though these tests have no scientific validity. Some cultures practice hymen reconstruction surgery, allowing women to fake virginity on their wedding nights to avoid disgrace or violence. The fact that such surgery exists, that women risk their lives to create the illusion of virginity, demonstrates how dangerous the obsession has become. And the obsession isn't just cultural, it's enforced through violence. Women have been murdered by family members for losing their virginity before marriage, in so-called honour killings that are really just medieval property law enforced through homicide. The virginity obsession, taken to its extreme, is literally deadly. Even in more liberal societies, the double standard persists. Women who are sexually active are still slut-shamed, judged, labelled, while men with identical behaviour are celebrated or ignored. Dating apps and social media have created new ways to police female sexuality, to judge women's sexual histories, to maintain the medieval hierarchy in digital form. The white wedding dress tradition persists, with most brides still wearing white, even though virginity at marriage is no longer the norm in many cultures. The symbolism has supposedly shifted from literal virginity to purity of intention, or new beginnings. But the underlying association remains. Y equals pure equals virginal equals valuable. And fathers still walk daughters down the aisle and give them away to grooms, still pose for photos where the father solemnly transfers his daughter's hand to her future husband, still participate in a ritual that originated as a property transfer. Most participants don't think about the medieval origins, don't consciously see it as ownership transfer, but the structure remains intact. Some women are reclaiming these traditions, reinterpreting them, stripping away the patriarchal implications. They're having their mothers walk them down the aisle, or walking alone, or walking with their partners. They're wearing coloured wedding dresses. They're explicitly rejecting purity culture and the virginity obsession. But they're fighting against centuries of tradition, against deeply embedded cultural scripts that tell us women's sexuality is special, dangerous, valuable, controllable, and fundamentally different from men's. They're fighting against medieval property law dressed up as romance, religious purity, and family values. The obsession with virginity was never about women's well-being, women's choices, or women's spirituality. It was always about controlling women's bodies to ensure that men knew which children were theirs, that inheritance flowed through legitimate bloodlines, that property stayed in the right families. Women were the vessels, and virginity was the quality seal. We've kept the obsession while pretending it's about something else. We've rebranded medieval property law as purity, as virtue, as traditional values. We've taught generations of girls that their bodies are commodities, that their sexuality is something to be guarded and given away rather than experienced and enjoyed, that their value as human beings is somehow tied to whether or not they've had sex. So tonight, if you've ever felt shame about your sexual history, if you've been judged for having sex or not having sex, if you've participated in or witnessed these purity rituals, remember what they really are. They're medieval inheritance law dressed in white, walking down an aisle, pretending to be about love when they were always about property. The virginity obsession isn't tradition, it's oppression with better marketing, and we're still buying it, generation after generation, white dress after white dress, purity ring after purity ring. Medieval men wanted to control inheritance. We've let them control us for 800 years. The property law ended, but the obsession remains, and we call it purity. The best man at a wedding has one job today: hold the rings, give a speech, and make sure the groom doesn't pass out. But in medieval times, the best man had a much more violent responsibility. He was literally the best man with a sword. His job was to help the groom kidnap the bride if her family objected to the marriage, and then fight off anyone who tried to stop them. Yes, you read that correctly. The best man was the groom's wingman in the most literal, violent sense possible. He wasn't there to organise the bachelor party or make sure the groom arrived on time. He was there to provide armed backup during what was essentially a sanctioned kidnapping operation disguised as a wedding. In medieval times, marriages were political and economic arrangements, usually negotiated between families. But sometimes the families couldn't agree. Sometimes the bride's family wanted more money, a better arrangement, or simply didn't like the groom. And sometimes the groom and bride wanted to get married regardless of family approval. The solution? Marriage by abduction. The groom, with the help of his best warrior friend, would literally kidnap the bride and marry her before anyone could stop them. Once the marriage was consummated, it couldn't be easily annulled, so the families would be forced to accept the arrangement. It was a hostile takeover of a human being, and the best man was essential to its success. The best man would scout the route, help plan the abduction, provide weapons, and most importantly, fight off the bride's family or any other pursuers who objected to the kidnapping. He needed to be skilled with a sword, trustworthy, and willing to commit violence on behalf of his friend's romantic aspirations. It was the ultimate test of friendship. Will you help me kidnap someone and fight her relatives? Even when marriages were arranged and consensual, the best man still served a protective function. Weddings were volatile events where rival families, jilted lovers, or opportunistic enemies might show up to cause trouble. The best man stood on the groom's right side, sword arm free, ready to draw his weapon if anyone objected too enthusiastically to the union. The tradition of standing on the groom's right comes directly from this. The best man positioned himself so he could draw his sword quickly to defend the groom if necessary. The groomsmen, the other armed friends standing with the groom, provided additional security. Medieval weddings were basically military operations with vows. And it wasn't just the groom who needed protection. The bride's family might change their minds mid-ceremony. Ex-boyfriends might attack. Rival suitors might try to steal the bride. Bandits might attempt to kidnap the bride for ransom. Medieval weddings were dangerous, and the best man was the designated bodyguard, enforcer, and if necessary, getaway driver. In some cultures, marriage by capture was so common that it became ritualized. The groom would pretend to abduct the bride, with her family pretending to resist, and the best man would help facilitate this performance. It was theatre, but theatre based on what had recently been actual practice. The mock kidnapping preserved the tradition while removing some of the actual violence. Over time, as marriages became less about abduction and more about consent, the best man's role shifted. He was no longer needed for combat, so his responsibilities became ceremonial. He stood with the groom as a witness, held the rings, helped manage logistics. But the core concept remained. The best man was the groom's closest ally, his most trusted friend, the person he could count on in a crisis. The title, Best Man, is literal. He was the best man for the job, the most capable warrior, the most reliable friend. If you were asking someone to help you kidnap a woman and fight off her armed relatives, you didn't choose your mediocre friend, you chose your best man. Today's best man has inherited this role stripped of its violence but retaining its importance. He's still the groom's primary support system, still responsible for making sure everything goes smoothly, still standing on the groom's right side during the ceremony. The sword is gone, but the symbolism remains. And the best man speech, that awkward tradition, where the best man stands up at the reception and tells embarrassing stories about the groom, has its roots in medieval toasts and declarations of loyalty. The best man would publicly vouch for the groom's character, assure the assembled guests that the groom was worthy of the bride, and promise to support the marriage. It was a public endorsement, a character witness statement, a pledge of continued friendship. Modern best man speeches have kept the public declaration aspect, but added humour, nostalgia, and usually several minutes of the best man clearly wishing he'd written something down instead of improvising after 3 drinks. The speech is often the most dreaded part of being best man, which is ironic because medieval best men faced actual armed combat and probably would have chosen public speaking over sword fighting. The bachelor party, another best man responsibility, also has medieval roots. Before the wedding, the groom and his male friends would feast, drink, and celebrate his last night of freedom. But it was also a final war council, a chance to go over the plan, prepare for potential complications, and make sure everyone knew their role in case the wedding turned violent. It was strategy meeting disguised as party. Modern bachelor parties have kept the excessive drinking and male bonding, but lost the military planning aspect. Now it's about embarrassing the groom, doing something memorable, possibly illegal, and definitely regrettable. The best man organises it, funds part of it, and ensures the groom survives it relatively intact. The transformation of the best man role from warrior to ringholder mirrors the transformation of marriage itself from property transaction to partnership. As women gained rights, as consent became required, as families stopped treating daughters as tradable assets, the need for armed wedding security decreased. The best man evolved from bodyguard to best friend, from fighter to facilitator. But some cultures have kept more violent versions of the tradition. In parts of Central Asia and the Caucasus, ritual bride kidnapping still occurs, with the groom and his friends abducting women, sometimes consensually as theatre, sometimes genuinely against the women's will. These kidnappings are illegal but still practiced, a horrifying persistence of medieval marriage customs. Even in cultures where kidnapping is purely theatrical, the play acting often involves the groom's male friends helping to capture the bride, carry her away from her family, and deliver her to the wedding ceremony. It's treated as fun tradition, but it's reenacting an actual crime that used to be standard practice. The best man's modern responsibilities seem trivial compared to his medieval duties. Hold some rings, give a speech, organise a party. But the underlying message is the same. This is the groom's most trusted person, the one who would do anything for him, the one standing beside him during one of life's most important moments. We've removed the swords but kept the significance. And the tradition continues to be primarily male, even in an era of gender equality and same-sex marriage. Most weddings still feature a best man, a male friend standing in for medieval warriors who once fought off bride-stealing competitors. Some couples have best women, best people, or mixed-gender wedding parties, but the traditional structure persists, with the best man holding a place of honour on the groom's right side. The position comes with expectations. The best man should be reliable, loyal, capable of handling responsibility. He should give a good speech, keep track of rings, coordinate with vendors and solve problems. He's unpaid labour, basically a wedding assistant, and he does it out of friendship and obligation. If the medieval best men could see modern weddings, they'd probably be confused. Where are the weapons? Where are the rival families trying to disrupt the ceremony? Why is everyone just sitting peacefully while the couple exchanges vows? And why is the best man's biggest challenge remembering where he put the rings instead of fighting off armed attackers? But they'd recognise the core tradition. A groom surrounded by his closest male friends, participating in a ritual that binds him to a woman. The ceremony has changed, become peaceful, but the structure remains. The best man still stands guard, just against different threats, logistical disasters, missing rings, awkward speeches, and the groom's own nervousness. So tonight, if you've ever been a best man, or had a best man at your wedding, appreciate the evolution. You participated in a tradition that started with actual violence, actual kidnapping, actual sword fights. You stood where medieval warriors once stood, held rings instead of weapons, and gave a speech instead of fighting off the bride's armed relatives. The best man isn't just the groom's friend. He's the descendant of a long line of wedding warriors, combat companions, and loyal allies who are literally willing to fight for their friend's marriage. You might not have fought anyone, but you stood in their place, carrying forward a tradition that survived centuries of social evolution. The swords are gone, the kidnappings have stopped mostly, but the best man remains, standing on the groom's right side, ready for whatever comes next, even if what comes next is just a slightly awkward speech and several hours of dancing. Medieval wedding violence now available in peaceful ceremony form. Hold the rings, the relatives are friendly now. It looks romantic in movies. The groom scoops up his new bride and carries her over the threshold of their new home. Oh, how sweet. Except it's not sweet at all. It's medieval superstition. People believed that evil spirits hung around doorways, waiting to trip up the bride and curse the marriage. Thresholds were considered liminal spaces, boundaries between outside and inside, public and private, unmarried and married life. And medieval people were convinced that these in-between places were absolutely crawling with demons, ghosts, and malevolent spirits who had nothing better to do than ruin weddings. The logic was elaborate. Evil spirits couldn't cross thresholds easily on their own, so they'd wait by doorways for opportunities to hitch a ride on unsuspecting humans. Brides were particularly attractive targets because they were in transition, moving from one life stage to another, from one family to another, from maidenhood to wifehood. All that change created spiritual vulnerability, making the bride a demon magnet. If a bride stumbled while crossing the threshold into her new home, it was catastrophic. The stumble proved that evil spirits had tripped her, which meant they'd successfully entered the house with her. The marriage would be cursed with bad luck, infertility, poverty, early death, or all of the above. One clumsy step could doom decades of married life. The solution was simple: don't let the bride's feet touch the threshold. If she never made contact with that spiritually dangerous boundary, the evil spirits couldn't trip her, couldn't attach themselves to her, couldn't follow her into the house. The groom carrying her over the threshold wasn't romantic. It was spiritual fumigation, a protective measure against demonic home invasion. And it had to be the groom who carried her. He was already spiritually connected to his new wife through the marriage ceremony, which meant any demons clinging to her would affect him anyway. Plus, medieval gender roles dictated that protecting the household from supernatural threats was man's work, along with hunting, fighting, and making all the important decisions. The bride was treated like precious, fragile cargo that might explode if handled incorrectly. The groom would lift her carefully, making sure her feet cleared the threshold completely. No toe touching the doorframe, no heel grazing the step. Complete aerial clearance of the demonic danger zone. Only once she was fully inside, feet safely on interior floor, was she allowed to stand on her own. Some medieval traditions added extra precautions. In parts of Europe, the threshold would be blessed by a priest before the couple arrived. Holy water would be sprinkled, prayers would be said, salt might be scattered across the doorway, because demons apparently hated both blessed water and seasoning. The threshold became a spiritual battlefield, with humans doing everything possible to prevent demonic infiltration. Other traditions required the bride to be carried in backwards, so she couldn't see any evil spirits that might try to follow her. Looking at demons was dangerous, might attract their attention, or give them power over you. Better to enter your new home facing away from danger, trusting your husband to carry you safely past the supernatural threats you couldn't see. And this wasn't just for the wedding night. In some cultures, the bride was carried over the threshold every time she entered the house for the first week of marriage because apparently demons were persistent and might still be hanging around waiting for another opportunity to curse the union. After a week, the marriage was considered spiritually secure enough that the bride could walk like a normal person. The tradition also had roots in Roman custom, where carrying the bride prevented her from appearing too eager to enter the marriage home. A reluctant bride, one who had to be carried, was modest, virtuous, properly hesitant about the whole sex and marriage situation. A bride who walked in enthusiastically was suspicious, probably too interested in the wedding night activities, definitely not as pure as she should be. So the threshold carrying served double duty, protecting against demons while also performing appropriate bridal reluctance. The bride was supposed to be a passive participant in her own life transition, literally carried from one stage to another, unable to enter her new life under her own power. Medieval people took this so seriously that if a groom dropped the bride while carrying her over the threshold, it was considered an extremely bad omen. Some cultures believed the marriage wouldn't last a year. Others thought it meant the bride would die in childbirth. A few considered it grounds for immediate annulment, because the groom had proven himself incapable of protecting his wife from basic spiritual threats. The pressure on grooms must have been intense. You've just gotten married, you're probably drunk on medieval wine that was basically vinegar, you're wearing uncomfortable ceremonial clothing, and now you have to lift a human being in a heavy dress and carry her over a doorway without stumbling, dropping her, or letting her feet touch anything, all while demons supposedly watch and wait for you to mess up. One wrong move and you've cursed your entire marriage. No pressure, Fast forward to today, and we're still doing it. Newlyweds still participate in the threshold carrying ritual, usually while laughing, sometimes struggling with the physics of a wedding dress and a door frame, occasionally resulting in bumped heads or near drops that everyone nervously laughs about. But we've reframed it as romance. It's about the groom showing strength, about the bride feeling cherished, about marking the beginning of their new life together. Nobody mentions demons, nobody talks about cursed thresholds. It's just a cute tradition that makes for good photos and lets the groom feel briefly heroic. Some modern couples skip it entirely, especially if the bride is taller or heavier than the groom, or if they're both modern enough to question why the woman needs to be carried like she's incapable of walking. But many still do it, either out of tradition or because it seems like a fun, romantic gesture that everyone expects at weddings. And the wedding industry has embraced it. There are now tutorials on how to properly carry a bride over the threshold, what the groom should wear for optimal lifting ability, how the bride should position herself to make carrying easier. We've turned medieval demon avoidance into a physical fitness challenge with online guides. Some couples modernize it. The bride carries the groom. They carry each other. They both hop over the threshold together. Same-sex couples decide who carries whom based on preference rather than gender roles. The tradition is adapting, slowly, but the core concept remains. Something special should happen when you cross the threshold into married life. Even if we've forgotten that the something special was originally spiritual self-defense. Apartment buildings have complicated the tradition. Do you carry your bride over the threshold of the building's front door? Your apartment door? Both? What if you live on the 5th floor and there's no elevator? Do you carry her up the stairs, risking a heart attack and definitely cursing the marriage through premature death? The logistics of modern threshold carrying haven't been fully worked out. Some hotels offer threshold carrying services for honeymoon suites, with staff ready to document the moment and also possibly help if the groom struggles. It's become a photo opportunity more than a spiritual ritual, another box to check on the wedding day to-do list. Carry bride over threshold, check. Post photo to Instagram, check. Demons avoided, presumably check. But underneath the modern romance and Instagram moments, the medieval logic lingers. We still treat thresholds as symbolically significant. We still mark the moment of entering a new home as important. We still perform a ritual that acknowledges something changed, something shifted, something began when the married couple crossed from outside to inside. The demons are gone, replaced by awkward physics and the groom praying he doesn't drop anyone. But the threshold remains a boundary worth marking, worth honouring, worth carrying someone across, even if we've forgotten why it ever mattered in the first place. Medieval people carried brides over thresholds to protect them from invisible evil spirits that modern people don't believe in. We carry brides over thresholds to recreate a moment we saw in romantic comedies, and because our parents expect it, and because it's tradition, and because maybe, deep down, we still believe that beginnings need protection, that transitions are vulnerable, that marking important moments with ritual makes them more real. The evil spirits were never there. The curse was never real. But the threshold carrying persists, generation after generation, groom after groom, carried bride after carried bride, all of them participating in a tradition designed to prevent something that was never going to happen anyway. So tonight, if you've ever been carried over a threshold, or carried someone over a threshold, or watched this ritual performed at someone's wedding, know what you witnessed. Medieval demon avoidance, repackaged as romance. Preserved through centuries because we collectively decided that even if the demons aren't real, the moment still matters. The threshold is just a doorway, the carrying is just physics. But we've turned it into meaning, into tradition, into something couples do because that's what couples have always done, at least for the last 800 years or so. The demons didn't get in, they never could. But we're still checking, just in case, one carried bride at a time, holding doors open for women, letting them exit elevators first, offering them seats. It all seems like polite chivalrous behaviour, and it is in a way. But it comes from medieval chivalry, which wasn't about respecting women as equals. It was about treating women like fragile decorative property that needed constant protection and supervision. Medieval chivalry was a code of conduct for knights, wealthy warriors who had the time and resources to develop elaborate rules about honour, combat, and how to treat women. But let's be clear about what chivalry actually was. It was a system that positioned women as helpless, delicate creatures who couldn't function without male assistance. Women were objects to be protected, possessed, and placed on pedestals where they looked pretty, but had no actual power. The ladies' first concept comes directly from this. In medieval times, a knight would offer his hand to help a lady step over puddles, climb stairs, or navigate rough terrain. Not because women were incapable of walking on their own, but because ladies weren't supposed to demonstrate physical capability. Showing that you could handle basic mobility challenges suggested you were lower class, a working woman, a peasant who didn't need assistance because she did manual labour. Noble women were supposed to be delicate, almost ornamental. Their inability to function independently was a status symbol. If you needed help stepping over a small obstacle, it proved you were so wealthy, so high status, that you'd never had to develop basic physical competence. You were decorative, not functional, and that was the ideal. Knights would also enter dangerous spaces first to ensure they were safe for ladies. This sounds protective, but it was also patronising. The assumption was that women couldn't assess danger themselves, couldn't defend themselves, couldn't make decisions about their own safety. They needed male guardians to scout ahead, determine if spaces were appropriate and grant permission to proceed. This extended to doorways, which is where the door-holding tradition comes from. A knight would open a door and enter first to make sure no danger lurked inside. Assassins, wild animals, unpleasant smells, whatever. Once he determined the space was safe and suitable for a lady, he'd hold the door open and allow her to enter. The woman wasn't entering first, she was being granted entry after a man decided it was acceptable. Over time, this evolved. The actual danger-checking part fell away, but the door-holding gesture remained. Men held doors for women not because they were checking for assassins, but because it was polite, it was expected. It demonstrated that you understood proper behaviour toward ladies. The protective reasoning disappeared, but the performance of protection continued. The same logic applied to letting women exit elevators, trains or carriages first. Originally, the man would exit first to assess the situation, then help the woman down. But as actual danger became less common, and the helping hand less necessary, the order reversed. Women exited first because it looked chivalrous, because it signalled respect, because it allowed men to perform the role of attentive guardian even when no guarding was needed. Offering seats to women comes from the same tradition. Medieval ladies weren't supposed to stand if sitting was available. Standing suggested you were working class, used to physical labour, capable of enduring minor discomfort. Ladies fainted at the slightest inconvenience, or at least they were supposed to, because fainting proved you were delicate, refined, and definitely not capable of standing on a crowded cart. So men offered seats, not because women actually needed them more than men, but because allowing a lady to stand was a social failure. It suggested you were uncivilized, ill-bred, or didn't understand proper treatment of delicate female property. The seat offering was a class performance as much as a gender one. Here's the thing about chivalry. It was never universal. It only applied to upper-class women. Peasant women, working women, women of lower social status received none of these courtesies. Knights didn't hold doors for serving women or offer seats to farm workers. Those women were expected to function independently, handle their own mobility, stand as long as necessary, because their class made them functionally equivalent to men in terms of expecting basic competence. Chivalry was a class marker disguised as gender courtesy. It distinguished noble women who deserved special treatment from common women who didn't. And the special treatment wasn't really respectful. It was infantilizing. It positioned women as incapable, weak, in need of constant assistance for tasks they could easily handle themselves. Fast forward to today, and we're still performing these rituals. Men still hold doors for women, still offer seats, still practice ladies' first protocols. But the reasoning has shifted. Now it's framed as respect, as good manners, as just being polite. The medieval context of women as helpless property has been stripped away, and we're left with gestures that look like courtesy but carry the weight of centuries of patronising assumptions, and it creates weird social dynamics. Some women appreciate these gestures, see them as respectful and considerate. Others find them condescending, preferring to be treated as equals who can handle doors and standing and basic mobility without assistance. Some men feel obligated to perform chivalry, worried they'll be judged as rude if they don't. Others question why they're expected to treat adult women like they're incapable of opening doors. The confusion is real because we've inherited a tradition that made sense in a specific historical context, women as protected property, and tried to transplant it into a modern context where women are supposed to be equals. The gesture and the underlying assumption no longer match, creating social friction and awkwardness. There's also the question of reciprocity. If a woman opens a door for a man, it's seen as her being polite or modern or egalitarian. If a man doesn't open a door for a woman, he's rude, failing to perform expected chivalry. The standard is asymmetrical, with different expectations based on gender, which is exactly what medieval chivalry intended. Men act, women receive actions. Men protect, women are protected. Men demonstrate capability, women demonstrate delicacy. Younger generations are increasingly abandoning gender-specific courtesy in favour of treating everyone the same. Whoever reaches the door first holds it. Whoever needs a seat most gets offered one. The chivalry code is being replaced with basic human courtesy that doesn't assume women are delicate objects requiring special handling. But the transition is awkward. Older generations judge younger men for not being chivalrous. Traditional men judge modern women for not appreciating chivalrous gestures. Modern women judge traditional men for assuming they need help. Everyone's confused about what's expected, what's respectful, what's offensive. And in professional settings, ladies first creates problems. Should male colleagues hold doors for female colleagues? Should female executives be offered special courtesies by male subordinates? Does performing chivalry in the workplace undermine women's authority by positioning them as needing help? The medieval courtesy code wasn't designed for contexts where women have power and authority, so applying it to modern professional situations creates contradictions. Some etiquette experts now recommend courtesy based on hierarchy rather than gender. Junior employees hold doors for senior employees regardless of gender. Younger people offer seats to older people regardless of gender. The person carrying less holds the door for the person carrying more. Courtesy becomes functional rather than performative, based on actual need rather than gender assumptions. But that requires abandoning the medieval framework entirely, acknowledging that ladies first never was about respecting women as equals. It was about treating them as a separate category of human that required different, special, ultimately limiting treatment. The pedestal isn't a place of honour, it's a display case, and it's restrictive. Modern chivalry defenders argue that there's nothing wrong with treating women specially, that it's respectful, that it makes women feel valued. But treating someone differently because of their gender, even if the treatment seems positive, reinforces the idea that men and women are fundamentally different categories requiring different rules. It preserves the medieval binary that positioned women as objects of protection rather than independent actors. And special treatment can quickly become restrictive treatment. If women are too delicate to open doors, maybe they're too delicate for physically demanding jobs. If they need seats offered, maybe they can't handle standing during long work days. If they require protection entering spaces, maybe they shouldn't enter dangerous spaces at all. The logic of chivalry, taken to its conclusion, becomes the logic of limitation. So tonight, the next time a man holds a door for a woman specifically because she's a woman, or offers a seat to a woman who isn't elderly or struggling with packages, recognise what's happening. It's a performance inherited from medieval knights, who treated noble women as decorative property requiring constant supervision. It's a courtesy that assumes incompetence, a gesture of respect that rests on a foundation of inequality. The knights are gone. The medieval class system has collapsed, but we're still performing ladies first, still treating women as a special category, still following rules designed for a world where women couldn't own property, couldn't work, couldn't vote, couldn't exist as independent legal persons. The door is just a door. The woman can open it herself. But we're still acting like she can't, because 800 years ago, a knight decided that proving women needed help was a sign of sophistication. Chivalry isn't dead. It's just been rebranded as politeness, and we're all still following the script. In the 21st century, in countries with constitutional monarchies, people still bow or curtsy when meeting royalty. Grown adults, with jobs and mortgages and opinions, bend their knees, or lower their heads to another human being because of bloodline. It's medieval feudalism in formal wear, and we're all just going along with it. The bow and curtsy aren't polite gestures, they're submission rituals, physical demonstrations of your inferior status, your acknowledgement that you are beneath the person you're greeting. In medieval times, bowing wasn't optional, it was mandatory, enforced by law and social custom, and the depth of your bow indicated exactly how far beneath royalty you were. Peasants bowed deeply, sometimes falling to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the ground. Lesser nobles bowed from the waist. Higher nobles gave a slight nod. The royal family didn't bow to anyone except God, and maybe the Pope. The entire social hierarchy was encoded in spinal angles, with everyone's back bent to demonstrate their place in the order. The logic was theological and political. Medieval monarchs ruled by divine right, which meant God himself had chosen them to rule. They weren't just politically superior, they were spiritually superior, closer to God, essentially holy. Failing to bow to a king was like failing to bow in church. It was disrespectful to the divine order, possibly heretical, definitely punishable. The bow physically demonstrated this worldview. By lowering your head, you positioned yourself below the monarch. You made yourself smaller, less important, literally looked down at the ground rather than meeting their eyes. Eye contact with royalty was often forbidden. Looking directly at a king or queen suggested you saw yourself as their equal, which you absolutely were not, and doing so could get you expelled from court or worse. Curtsying, the female version, was even more elaborate. Women would bend their knees, lower their bodies, bow their heads, all while maintaining perfect balance and grace in heavy dresses and uncomfortable shoes. The curtsy was a full-body submission performance, a demonstration that you acknowledged your inferior status and possessed the physical control and training to display it properly. And there were rules, detailed complex rules about when to bow, how deeply, how long to hold it, when you were allowed to stand back up, bow too shallowly and you've insulted the monarch, bow too deeply and you're being sarcastic or mocking, hold it too long and you're making everyone uncomfortable. Stand up before given permission, and you've committed a breach of protocol that everyone will remember. Medieval courts employed people specifically to teach proper bowing and curtsying. It was a skill that required training, practice, and careful attention to social rank. You needed to know exactly how to bow to a king versus a prince versus a duke. Get it wrong, and you'd marked yourself as ignorant, low-class, or foreign. The bow was a test, and everyone was watching to see if you'd pass. The ritual also served a practical purpose. It forced people to approach royalty slowly, with their heads down, making assassination more difficult. You can't quickly pull a weapon and stab someone if you're bent over staring at the floor. The bow was security theatre, making everyone perform vulnerability before getting close to the monarch. Fast forward to today, and constitutional monarchies have stripped away most of the monarch's actual power. Kings and queens are figureheads, ceremonial positions with no real political authority. They don't rule by divine right. They don't make laws. They're essentially well-funded national mascots, historical artifacts maintained at public expense. And yet, we still bow to them, still curtsy, still perform the same submission rituals that medieval peasants performed when monarchs had actual power over life and death. The context has completely changed, but the gesture remains, preserved like a museum piece that we occasionally take out and perform for tradition's sake. In England, meeting a member of the royal family requires bowing or curtsying. There are official protocols published by the royal household, instructions on proper greeting procedures. Men should bow from the neck, a slight nod. Women should curtsy, right foot behind left, slight knee bend, head inclined. These are official instructions for how to demonstrate your inferior status to someone whose primary qualification is being born into the right family. And people follow these instructions. Celebrities, politicians, athletes, accomplished professionals, people who've earned their status through talent or work, all bend their knees or bow their heads to someone whose only accomplishment is genetic luck. It's medieval social hierarchy preserved in amber, trotted out for state dinners and royal events. The excuse is always respect or tradition. We bow out of respect for the institution, for history, for cultural heritage. But respect would be treating royalty as equals, acknowledging their humanity while not pretending their bloodline makes them superior. What we're actually doing is performing inequality, demonstrating through physical gesture that we accept the premise that some humans are fundamentally above others based solely on birth. And it's not just British royalty. Countries across Europe, Asia and the Middle East maintain royal families and expect bowing or equivalent submission gestures. Japan has elaborate bowing protocols for different members of the imperial family. Thailand has laws against disrespecting the monarchy. Sweden, Norway, Denmark all maintain royal families that expect some form of physical deference. Some countries have modernised the protocols. The Netherlands doesn't require curtsying anymore. Spain has relaxed formal greeting requirements. But many countries cling to the medieval rituals, insisting that respect for tradition requires performing submission to hereditary rulers who have no actual power. The really absurd part is watching elected officials bow to royalty. Prime ministers, presidents, elected representatives of the people, performing submission rituals to unelected monarchs. It's democracy literally bowing to inherited privilege, acknowledging that even in modern systems, we haven't fully escaped the medieval idea that bloodline confers superiority. And children are taught to bow and curtsy young. Royal children learn the protocols as part of their training. Common children in monarchies are taught in school how to properly greet royalty, just in case they ever encounter them. We're raising generations to physically perform inequality, to accept that some people deserve submission based on their family tree. The protocols have also created social pressure and confusion. If you meet royalty, do you have to bow? What if you're from a country without a monarchy? What if you're ideologically opposed to hereditary privilege? What if you just don't want to physically perform submission to another human being? Technically, in most countries, bowing is optional. You can refuse. But refusing carries social consequences. You'll be judged as rude, disrespectful, possibly making a political statement. The media will comment on your failure to bow. People will debate whether you were right to refuse or wrong to break with tradition. Your refusal becomes news, which is ridiculous because choosing not to perform a medieval submission ritual should be the default, not the controversy. Some people have famously refused. Various politicians, celebrities and public figures have either declined to bow or perform the absolute minimum required by politeness. They're usually criticised by traditionalists who believe that respect for institutions requires participating in their rituals no matter how outdated or ideologically problematic. But here's the thing, you can respect history without reenacting its worst parts. You can acknowledge the cultural significance of monarchy without literally bending your knee to hereditary privilege. You can appreciate tradition without requiring everyone to physically perform inequality every time they meet someone with the right last name. The bow and curtsy made sense in medieval times when monarchs held absolute power, when divine right was accepted theology, when the social hierarchy was rigid and enforced through violence. People bowed because refusing could get you imprisoned or executed. The physical submission matched the political reality. But now we bow to people who cut ribbons at ceremonies, wave from balconies, and pose for photographs. We perform submission rituals to individuals who have less actual power than most elected officials, who serve primarily symbolic functions, who are constitutionally prohibited from interfering in governance. We're following medieval scripts in a world that's supposedly moved beyond medieval values. We're teaching children to bow to bloodline superiority in schools that also teach equality and democracy. We're performing feudalism as theatre and calling it respect, and the royals themselves are often complicit in maintaining the system. They could easily abolish bowing and curtsying requirements, release statements saying such protocols are outdated, encourage people to greet them as equals. Some have made small steps in that direction, but most cling to the formal protocols. The bowing, the elaborate deference, because eliminating the submission rituals might undermine their special status. If people stop bowing, they might start questioning why we maintain expensive royal families at all. The rituals reinforce the hierarchy, make the royals seem important, special, worthy of continued public funding. Without the performance of deference, the hereditary privilege becomes harder to justify. So we keep bowing, keep curtsying, keep performing medieval submission to modern figureheads, because tradition is apparently more important than acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, we've moved beyond the worldview that required bowing in the first place. Different cultures justify it differently. In Asia, bowing is part of broader respect culture, showing deference to elders, superiors, honoured guests. The royal bow fits within that framework, though it's still fundamentally about hierarchy. In Europe, it's framed as honouring history, respecting institutions, maintaining cultural traditions. But the underlying message is the same. Some people are above you, and you demonstrate that through physical submission. The protocols have also created awkward modern situations. What happens when royalty meets other royalty? Do they bow to each other? How do you determine who bows lower? What about when royalty meets elected heads of state? Should presidents bow to kings? Should prime ministers curtsy to queens? The medieval protocols weren't designed for modern political complexity, so we get bizarre situations where democratic leaders perform submission to hereditary rulers, or everyone stands awkwardly trying to figure out protocol. Some royal families have modernised their expectations, quietly stopped requiring bows and curtsies from casual encounters, made the protocols optional. But for official events, state occasions, the rituals persist, broadcast on television for millions to watch, reinforcing the idea that bowing to royalty is normal, expected, appropriate. So tonight, the next time you see someone bow or curtsy to royalty, or hear about protocol requirements for meeting royal families, remember what you're watching. Medieval feudalism, performed as etiquette, preserved because we've collectively decided that some traditions are worth maintaining, even when they embody values we supposedly rejected centuries ago. The divine right of kings is dead, the political power is gone, but we're still bending our knees, still lowering our heads, still performing submission to bloodline superiority, because medieval feudal lords decided that's how inferior humans should greet their betters. The monarchs are just people. Privileged, well-dressed, expensive people, but people. And we're still bowing to them because apparently 800 years isn't long enough to break the habit of treating hereditary privilege as something worthy of physical submission. Democracy in theory, feudalism in practice. Welcome to the modern monarchy where everyone's equal, but some people still make you bow. You've been nagged about this one your entire life. Someone gives you a gift, and you have to send a handwritten thank you note, or you're basically a monster. This practice comes from medieval courts, where written correspondence was a way to demonstrate literacy, refinement, and social status. In medieval times, most people couldn't read or write. Literacy was a luxury skill, restricted to the clergy, nobility, and a small merchant class who needed it for business. If you could write a letter, you were demonstrating that you came from the wealth and privilege, that you'd received education most people couldn't access, that you belonged to the upper classes who had time and resources for such refinements. Written thank you notes emerged as a status display. After receiving gifts or hospitality from another noble family, you'd send a carefully composed letter expressing gratitude. The letter proved several things simultaneously. You were literate, you had access to expensive paper and ink, you knew the proper forms of address and composition, and you understood the social obligation to acknowledge gifts formally. The content of medieval thank you letters was highly ritualized. You couldn't just say, "Thanks for the goblet." You had to compose elaborate expressions of gratitude, reference the giver's generosity and nobility, position yourself as their humble servant despite being equally noble, and follow strict formatting rules that demonstrated your education in proper correspondence. These letters were performances. They'd be read aloud to the entire household, shown to guests, sometimes even circulated among the nobility as examples of proper etiquette and refined expression. A well-written thank you note enhanced your family's reputation. A poorly written one, or worse, no note at all, marked you as ignorant, ungrateful, or low class. The practice intensified during the Victorian era, when the rising middle class desperately wanted to prove they belonged among the upper classes. Etiquette books exploded in popularity, filled with detailed rules about thank you notes. How soon to send them, how to format them, what phrases to use, what paper was appropriate, even how to fold and seal them properly. These rules weren't about gratitude. They were about gatekeeping, creating social tests that separated people who knew proper etiquette from people who didn't. If you sent your thank you note too quickly, you seemed eager, probably middle class trying too hard, too slow, and you were ungrateful. The timing had to be perfect, usually within a week of receiving a gift, to demonstrate you were properly grateful but not desperately so, and the notes had to be handwritten. Printed cards were considered impersonal, lazy, evidence that you couldn't be bothered to invest personal effort. Typewritten notes were even worse, suggesting you'd turned gratitude into a business transaction. Only a handwritten note, an elegant script on quality paper, demonstrated sufficient appreciation. The Victorian rules were exhaustive and contradictory. You couldn't use the word thanks because it was too casual. You had to reference the specific gift, but not dwell on it too much. You needed to mention how you'd use the gift, but not in ways that suggested you needed it out of poverty. You had to express gratitude while maintaining dignity, warmth while remaining formal. It was an impossible standard, which was the point. The rules existed to make social interaction difficult, to create opportunities for failure, to distinguish people who'd been trained in proper etiquette from people who hadn't. Thank you notes became a class marker disguised as courtesy. Fast forward to today, and we're still following these rules. Wedding thank you notes are practically mandatory, with etiquette experts insisting they must be handwritten, must mention the specific gift, must be sent within 3 months. Skip them or send them late and you'll be judged, gossiped about, possibly uninvited from future events. The same applies to baby shower gifts, graduation presents, holiday gifts from relatives. There's a hierarchy of gift occasions that require thank you notes versus ones where a verbal thanks is sufficient, and everyone's supposed to know the distinction without being told. Get it wrong, and you're rude, ungrateful, poorly raised. And the handwritten requirement persists despite the fact that we live in an era of instant digital communication. You could text someone a genuine, heartfelt expression of gratitude immediately after receiving a gift. You could email them, call them, video chat them. But none of that counts as a proper thank you. Only the handwritten note delivered via mail carries sufficient weight. This creates absurd situations. You receive a gift, verbally thank the person immediately, text them a thanks with a photo of you using the gift, and then weeks later send a handwritten note saying essentially the same thing you've already said twice. The note isn't about communication, it's about ritual compliance, about demonstrating you know the rules. And for people with busy lives, children, jobs, the thank you note obligation becomes a source of stress and guilt. There's a stack of gifts that need notes. You know you should write them. You feel bad about not writing them. The guilt compounds until writing the notes feels like a burden rather than an expression of genuine gratitude. Some etiquette experts have tried to modernize the rules, declaring that emailed thank yous are acceptable for some occasions, that text messages can suffice for casual gifts. But traditionalists push back hard, insisting that handwritten notes are the only proper form of gratitude, that abandoning this standard represents a collapse of civilized society, which is ridiculous, because the standard was always about class performance, not gratitude. Medieval nobles and Victorian strivers weren't more grateful than modern people, who send thank you texts. They were more invested in demonstrating their social status through elaborate courtesy performances. The thank you note obsession has also created a weird economy. There are entire stores dedicated to stationery for thank you notes, Etsy shops selling custom designs, books teaching people how to write proper thank yous. We've built an industry around a social obligation that exists primarily to make people feel inadequate if they don't comply. And there's the question of authenticity. A handwritten note that you resent writing, that feels like homework, that you compose because you're obligated rather than because you feel genuine gratitude. Is that more meaningful than a spontaneous heartfelt text? We've prioritized form over substance, ritual over emotion, obligation over sincerity. Children are drilled in thank you note writing from a young age. They have to write notes for birthday gifts, often before they can write fluently, resulting in barely legible scrawls that parents force them to produce because teaching proper etiquette is supposedly more important than allowing children to express genuine appreciation in their own ways. The notes become performative. Kids learn to write thank you for the gift in various formulaic ways, not because they feel grateful but because adults make them. They're being trained in medieval court etiquette, learning that gratitude isn't about feeling, it's about proper performance of required rituals. And some people weaponize thank you notes. They judge others for not sending them, keep mental scorecards of who acknowledged gifts properly, discuss others' failures at family gatherings. The note becomes less about gratitude and more about catching people in etiquette violations. There's also the passive-aggressive thank you note, where you thank someone for a gift while subtly expressing displeasure. Thank you so much for the lovely sweater in size medium. It's almost my size. The format allows for coded criticism disguised as courtesy, another way medieval correspondence rules created opportunities for social warfare. Modern technology has complicated things further. Do you need to send thank you notes for gifts ordered online, where the giver receives automated delivery confirmation? What about crowdfunding contributions, Venmo gifts? The Victorian rules didn't anticipate digital gift giving, leaving everyone confused about proper protocol. Some people have abandoned the practice entirely, arguing that immediate verbal or digital thanks is sufficient, that adding a handwritten note weeks later is redundant and wasteful. They're often criticised by older generations who view the abandonment of thank you notes as evidence of societal decline, disrespect, or generational failure. But the criticism reveals what thank you notes always were: a way for one generation to judge another, for one class to distinguish itself from another, for people who know arbitrary rules to feel superior to people who don't. The medieval noble writing elaborate gratitude letters was demonstrating literacy and status. The Victorian lady carefully timing her thank you note was proving her etiquette training. The modern person stressing about writing handwritten notes is following rules that lost their original meaning but retained their power to make people feel inadequate. Gratitude is important. Acknowledging gifts is kind. But the specific ritual of handwritten thank you notes sent within precise timeframes on proper stationery isn't about gratitude. It's about compliance with rules invented by people who used courtesy as a weapon, who created elaborate social protocols to separate acceptable people from unacceptable ones. So tonight, if you're someone who sends thank you notes religiously, who judges others for not sending them, or who feels guilty about the stack of notes you haven't written, remember what you're participating in. Medieval status displays, Victorian class anxiety, and modern social pressure, all combined into a ritual that measures your worth not by your genuine appreciation, but by your willingness to perform gratitude in the approved format. The gratitude is real, the obligation is medieval. And we're all still writing notes to people who already know we're thankful, because apparently saying it, texting it, or showing it isn't enough. We have to write it down, by hand, on paper, and mail it. Like we're still living in an era where written correspondence was the only option, and literacy was a status symbol. The pen is mightier than the sword. But the thank you note is mightier than genuine appreciation, at least according to rules invented by people who died before indoor plumbing. Write your notes. Or don't. The medieval nobles won't know either way. So, you've made it through. Congratulations. You've spent the day following instructions from people who died 700 years ago, people who thought demons lived in doorways and that sneezing could launch your soul across the room. And here's the truly wild part. We know better. We have science, medicine, technology that would look like magic to medieval peasants. We've split the atom, mapped the human genome, and put rovers on Mars. And yet, we're still knocking on wood, throwing salt over our shoulders, and wearing uncomfortable formal clothes because that's just what you do. These rituals didn't survive because they work. They survived because humans crave continuity, because tradition feels safer than change, and because questioning every social custom is exhausting when you're just trying to get through the day without offending someone. But maybe that's the point. Medieval people were terrified, struggling to survive in a brutal world they didn't understand. They created these rules and rituals not out of wisdom, but out of desperation, trying to impose order on chaos, trying to protect themselves from forces they couldn't control. They failed, obviously. Their superstitions didn't prevent disease. Their elaborate courtesies didn't stop wars. Their rules didn't make life less brutal. But the rituals gave them something to hold on to, something shared, something human. And we've kept holding on. Not because we believe in the demons or the curses or the divine right of kings, but because letting go feels like losing something, even if we can't quite articulate what. So tonight, as you drift off in your comfortable bed with your indoor plumbing, and your antibiotics, and your complete lack of demons, maybe give a small nod to the medieval people who invented these ridiculous rules. They were doing their best with what they had. And somehow, against all odds, here we are, still following their instructions, still performing their rituals, still living in their very long shadow. We're not medieval anymore. But we're not quite modern either. We're something in between, carrying the past into the future, one absurd tradition at a time. Sleep well. The demons aren't real. The rules don't make sense. But we're following them anyway, because that's what humans do.